IB Nation, welcome to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday. That means it is time for the Notre Dame Midweek Rundown. Going to do this week a little bit different for you guys. Instead of 3 topics and no mailbag, we're going to go do 2 topics and a mailbag. So I got Ryan Roberts in sort of the background right now, playing a little bit of producer role. So he's starring some questions. He's going to bring it up when we get to the mailbag. So it's not going to be a normal thing. Just going to do it a little bit different for this week. Have a little bit of a mailbag since I don't have a third topic that I'm going to break down today. The 2 topics we're going to discuss today are going to be one Notre Dame team related and one Notre Dame recruiting related. And the Notre Dame team subject is going to basically talk about the run defense. We're now 2 weeks away from Notre Dame's first fall practice. They're going to start fall camp on July 26th. We're actually going to have decent amount of access this year, only 2 full practices, but a lot of the early, five periods or so. So we're going to get to see a decent amount of fall camp. We will not be seeing the last couple weeks, which I totally support and would not allow people to be at either in the 2 weeks leading up to when you start really doing game prep. So we're actually going to have some decent access this year. So we're going to have a lot of pretty good conversations about fall camp. So that's going to be a lot of fun, I think, too. So we're going to have a lot of that. But, man, we're 2 weeks away from fall camp starting. I cannot believe how long the summer took. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we're right there 2 weeks away. So we're going to a lot of these shows, as we have said already, are kind of leading into the season. And one of the big ones that I wanted to talk about today was obviously the Notre Dame run defense. Because when you dive into the numbers, it is very clear that Notre Dame's run defense has to get better. The second topic I'm going to discuss today is CJ Carr and his rankings. And this is a very strange topic. I listened to a little bit of an interview that the guy that does the rankings did. I was more confused coming out of the listening to that, and I had to listen, beyond having to listen to some absurdity, but just listening to him explain it. Like, I understand what he's saying. I think it's a really bad explanation and just very misguided explanation, and one that there's a lot of puzzling stuff to it. So we're going to dive into that as well. That'll be topic number 2. Topic number 1 today, everybody, is going to be about the Notre Dame run defense. And what do we always talk about, right? The discussion for Notre Dame is it's not about, okay, can they be a top 10 team? Can they be a top 20 team? What are they going to be? It's about, are they going to compete for championships or not? And there's a lot of areas where Notre Dame has to continue to get better and better and better if they're going to compete for a championship. This has been a good football program, right? Going back to 2017, Notre Dame has been a 10-plus win team every year except for one. That was this past season. This past year, they went 9-4, had a win over a top 5 team during the season, a 21-point win, had a bowl win over an SEC opponent, had some quality wins, had some losses where they just weren't good enough. And in those losses, a big problem that we saw for Notre Dame was the run defense. And we've seen this really over the years. It's been a big issue for Notre Dame. And so this is an area where Notre Dame is going to have to get a lot better. And being a championship football team requires a lot of different factors. I'm still a believer that being a championship football team requires you, and Marcus Freeman has said this, a lot of coaches still say this, it requires you to be a team that can stop the run. You don't have to be an insane run defense. Like when you look at like some of Alabama's early championship teams, like their 2009 team was pretty good against the run. They gave up 79.4 yards per game on the ground. Their 11 team gave up 72.2 yards per game on the ground. Their 12 championship team gave up 76.4. They've had some really crazy run defenses over the years. 75.7 in 2015, 63.9 in 2016. So things kind of started to change around 2017 with Alabama as began the transition for them to a more offensive-oriented attack. And since then, their lowest yards that they've allowed in a season in the run game is I believe in the year that they won the title in 2020. 2016, they gave up 63.9, but since then they gave up 94.7. In 2017, they've given up Let's see here. I'm going to pull this number up here real quick. So let's look at their rushing defense: 94.7 and the 17, 121.3 and 18, 137.2 and 19, 113.1 in the COVID year. 2021, a playoff team, 86 yards per game, and then this past year they were back up to 130.1. And so, so from 2011 to 2017, Alabama won 3 titles. And in that stretch, they never gave up more than 94.7 yards per game rushing. Well, actually, they did once, 102.4. And you know what they did that year? They got smashed in the playoff by Ohio State, giving up over 200 rushing yards, and they ended up getting knocked out in the semifinal, gave up 281 rushing yards. Then you look at 2013, even though they weren't necessarily a great team that year, guess what? 106.2 yards per game and then 76.4. So their quote unquote down years were 106.2 and 102.4, didn't win a title. From 2018 on, they've only won 1 title in 5 years. So 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, right? So 17, a span of 7 years. Alabama won 3 titles. From 18 to 22, a span of 5 years, Bama won 1 title. One of the big differences, they have not been as good stopping the run. Like I said, think about it. 102, 106 are the lows from 2011 on. Actually, if you really look at it from 2009 on, so from 2009 to 2017, their 3 lowest years were 110.2, 106.2, and 102.4. The last 5 years, 121.3, 137.2, 113.1. COVID year, 86 in 2021, year where they were the runner-up, and then 130.4 last year. 1 title in 5 years. And I think that's something that Coach Saban is trying to fix when it comes to getting his defense back on track, because you need to be able to score points. We've talked about this, but you're still seeing a pattern in the 5 years that Alabama has only won 1 title. You're still seeing a pattern. And the 1 title they won, by the way, I forgot to mention this. The 1 title they won was a year where they had a very low, their yards allowed per game was lower. It was the second best stretch that they've had. They have also been a team, if you look at it, so from 18, they obviously made it to the national title game that year, got blown out. Why? Their defense wasn't as good. So you've still got to be able to make stops to compete in championships, but to win it, you also have to be able to score. So we've talked a lot about Notre Dame needing to be able to score. Notre Dame's had some very good defenses over the years, and I would argue their 18 and 20 teams that made the playoff were carried by their defense primarily. But in those years, they still weren't able to do damage in the playoff because they couldn't stop the run. That's been a big thing. So let's look at the numbers to make my point. I'm going to back up my point. These are the national champions going back to 2016, and I'm using 2016 as an example to show, number one, for Notre Dame, for example, how far they've come, but then also to show that where there's improvement to be made. The 2016 Clemson team, going back to 2016, so this is the last 7 national titles, was the worst rush defense there was from a yards per game standpoint. They ranked 24th in the country. The LSU team in 2019, which was that elite offense, was a team that gave up 120.8 yards per game, 3.7 per carry. They ranked 21st in the country. So the last 7 national champions are teams that have ranked in the top 25 in rush defense, every single one. And then 4 of the champions have been top 5 rush defenses in yards allowed per game. The story's not a whole lot different when you look at yards per attempt, which is another way to look at how to evaluate success in the run defense, because you can actually be not a great run defense and give up a lot of yards, or not give up a lot of yards because your offense is elite and you're blowing people out. And so teams aren't running the ball in the second half because they're throwing the ball. So I think you have to look at yards per attempt. And that's where you see, like with the LSU run defense in 2019, I think the yards per attempt, I would argue, is a little bit more indicative of who they were as a defense that year than more so the yards. They were a top 30-ish type of run defense. They won a title that year because they had arguably the greatest offense ever known to mankind. So unless Notre Dame is going to have the greatest offense we've ever seen, score 50 points a game, have a quarterback that throws for 60 touchdowns, have 3 first-round draft picks at wide receiver, a first-round draft pick at running back, the number 1 overall draft pick at quarterback, et cetera, then they're going to have to be able to be better on defense, even than what LSU was that year. Then, of course, the last 3 seasons, Alabama had a very staunch defense in 2020. And then Georgia, of course, the last 2 years has been an elite defense. And so I think those are the things that you look at and say that Notre Dame's got to get better. This is evidence of it. Now, you've had some teams that have made the playoff and not been great in rush defense. TCU this past year actually won a playoff game without a very good run defense. They gave up 158.9 yards per game, 4.3 yards per attempt. In 2021, Cincinnati gave up 149.1 yards per game, 3.6 per attempt, which is actually pretty decent. All the 2020 teams were pretty good. Actually, Alabama that year was the lowest in rush defense of the 4 playoff teams. Notre Dame was 0.1 ahead of them. You look at number in 2019, you had Oklahoma was a team that gave up 134.1 yards per game, which isn't bad, but not good enough. And then 4.1 yards per attempt, which is not good. 2018, Oklahoma gave up 159.8 points per game. Notre Dame was at 139.5. And those are the 2 teams that obviously lost in the first round of the playoff that year. The next year, Oklahoma again, 156.5. Not a great rush defense. Georgia that year gave up 126 a game, which was good, but again, something that hurt them in the postseason. And then, of course, in 2016, Washington was a defense that gave up a little over 130 yards per game. So you've seen teams that have not had great run defenses, but not a lot of those teams won playoff games. I think you look at Alabama in 2018, gave up 121. They won a playoff game. In 2017, Georgia gave up 126. They won a playoff game in a overtime shootout, by the way. You look at past years as well. Oklahoma in 2019 didn't win a game. You look at 2021, Cincinnati didn't win a game. Michigan had a much worse defense in 2021, rush defense statistically, than they did last year. They were 126.4 in 2021. This past year, they were 97.9. Again, they were a little bit more competitive in the postseason, but what could they not do in the semifinal game against TCU? They couldn't stop the run. TCU ran for over 200 yards that game. So you've got to be able to stop the run, not just statistically, but then you've got to be able to do it in the postseason. So you look at these numbers, and it backs up the point that I'm making. Then you look at what Notre Dame has done during this last 7-year stretch, and you see that their numbers aren't competitive compared to the other teams that are winning championships. I did want to start off with the 2016 team because that was the last year of the Brian Van Gorder era. And Notre Dame was obviously a very poor run defense. But if you look at since then, Notre Dame has been a pretty consistent team in some areas. Their best year was the COVID year at 113.0. I think whenever you look at a span of 5 to 6 plus years and the 2020 season was an outlier for teams, then you have to kind of say that was more COVID related. Schedule changes, practice changes. It was just a much weirder year. Outside of the one COVID year, Notre Dame has been a minimum 131.3 per game. Now, the interesting thing is that actually of the non-COVID years, last year was actually Notre Dame's best statistical year really since Bob Diaco was the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. So if you look at it, the 131.3 was actually Notre Dame's best rushing defense statistic since the 2012 team in a non-COVID year. And that team was significantly better. That team gave up 105 yards per game that season. So when you look at Notre Dame, they're giving up too many yards. And then you look at the second category, the YPA, that's yards per attempt. And when you look at Notre Dame statistics there, 3.8 or better every year. I'll take you back to the teams that are winning championships real quick. 2.9, 2.6, 3.3, 3.7, 2.5, 2.7, 3.7. So even the teams that have given up yards that are comparable with Notre Dame. So if you look at LSU in 2019, Clemson in 2016, Clemson in 2016 had numbers that are somewhat comparable to Notre Dame's. What Notre Dame was the last couple of years in yards per game, but Notre Dame was 0.2 lower in yards per attempt, which in relative to the rest of college football was significantly lower than what we saw in Clemson in 2016 because the game has changed a little bit. So I think those are certainly areas when you look at Notre Dame and say that it's very clear defensively, one of the key areas that you have to get better at. So let's talk about why. Why is being a strong run defense important? Number one, I think a strong rush defense means that you force teams to go through the air. And anyone will tell you in football, if you're a football coach, a lot more bad can happen when you throw the football than you can run the football. That's why you see a lot of teams that throw the ball a ton. They have a lot of quick game, low risk, Not a lot of opportunity for some of the worst negatives, sacks, interceptions, those type of things that you can fall victim to when you throw the football. And so when you look at running the football, if you're a team that struggles to run the ball, or your team is very good stopping the run, more importantly, then you put teams in more passing situations, so more second and longs, more third and longs. If you can be a team that also gets disruptives, and not every good run defenses gets disruptives, and I'll get to that here in a little bit as well, then what you're going to find is you're going to be even more effective at creating negatives. And then if you're a team that can stop the run, I think in a lot of cases that's going to put you in a situation where you're also going to be a team that's good at creating a lot of turnovers, or at least a lot of the disruptive plays. And turnovers can mean, disruptives can mean turnovers, or they can just mean you're creating a lot of negatives. And teams that do that are usually pretty effective. So, like for example, last year Georgia was not a great defense when it comes to forcing turnovers. They ranked in the 50s last year. They were 30 in the year before, and they're not a team that is a great tackle for loss team because of the style of play that they have, and that has to be factored into the equation as well. But what Georgia does is they don't give up a lot of big plays, and they create a lot of sort of I would call stuff, so 0 yards or fewer. They also have a ton of efficient plays on defense of 2 yards, 3 yards or less in normal downs, 2 yards or less in more short yardage situations. And so when you get into those instances, and you look at a team that is really good stopping the run, they're not giving up big plays, and they're putting teams in really challenging run situations. And that's something that you have to be really good at, in my opinion, to be a really good defense. And so having that kind of defense allows you to be highly effective as a football team. For Notre Dame, it comes down to it, and you say, okay, well, for Notre Dame, it's important for a couple reasons. Number one is this season they play teams that want to be balanced. Ohio State wants to be balanced. I think at least when they're good, they are. USC wants to have a level of balance. We talked about this going into the matchup last year. One of the big misconceptions about Lincoln Riley is because he is such a really smart pass game guy. They've obviously had a ton of great success throwing the football over the years. But one of the big misconceptions that people have had about Oklahoma over the years, and even last year with USC, is they do like to run the football. They do like to have a level of balance. If Travis Dye doesn't get hurt last year and he only plays 10 games, if he plays a full season, he's over 1,000 yards. If you look at where Oklahoma was under Lincoln Riley in the past, their worst season, I believe, was like 179.7. They had a number of 180.6. But when they were really rolling in Riley's first few years, you're talking about a team that was 236 yards per game, 217, 247, and 240. They want to be able to be balanced. The years that Oklahoma under Riley had a Heisman Trophy winner quarterback, they averaged 200. Excuse me, that's USC. I'm looking at Oklahoma. So in 2016, that's the year. No, Baylor. What year did Baker Mayfield win the Heisman Trophy? Was that 2015? I'm trying to find that here real quick because I think 2017 was Lamar Jackson, right? Baker was 2016. Okay, so yeah, so Baker was no, Baker was 2017. All right, so Baker wins the Heisman Trophy in 2017. That year, they averaged 217.8 rushing yards per game. Had 2 running backs with over 700 yards, including Rodney Anderson, who had over 1,100 yards, with the Heisman Trophy winner quarterback. The next year, they go out. Kyler Murray is the starting quarterback. He wins the Heisman Trophy, throws for over 4,000 yards, but they rush for over 240 yards per game. Kyler Murray had over 1,000 yards, but they also had Trey Sermon, who had 947, and Kennedy Brooks, who had 1,056. So I think when you look at that team and you look at what they're trying to do run game wise, they are a team that likes to be balanced. So your 2 best opponents want to be balanced. Clemson is a team that is going to strive for greater balance this season with the things that they do. If you look at TCU last year with Garrett Riley as the offensive coordinator, what was a big reason for TCU's success against Michigan in the semifinal game? They were able to run the football. TCU averaged 193 yards per game last year. They had a Kendra Miller, if he does not miss, I believe he missed the semifinal game against Michigan. He didn't. I mean, he only played carried the ball 8 times against Michigan, got hurt, didn't play in the title game, still rushed for 1,399 yards last year. Very productive running back. And when you look at TCU's rushing performance, they struggled in the championship game and couldn't run the football. Before that, they were over 100 yards in every game. And they had, let's see, 7 games last year with over 200 yards, including a 361-yard performance against Oklahoma, and they ran for 263 against Michigan. So again, a team that wants to be balanced. Well, now that comes to Clemson, and that's what you're going to see a lot of with Clemson. He's also from his brother's, obviously, lineage as far as offensive football, and his brother also wants to be able to run the football and be balanced, even with great production in the pass game. So those are things where just Notre Dame getting through their schedule this season are going to have to be able to play teams that stop the run. Navy obviously is a team that is going to try to run the football. When you look at Notre Dame's overall numbers, the reason I put I like to focus on yards per attempt also for Notre Dame is because Notre Dame's total yards per game is going to be a little higher than the other teams that we're looking at because they're always going to have Navy on the schedule. There have been years where Notre Dame has given up 200 plus yards to Navy and held them way over 100 yards below their season average. And so that part can be a tad misleading. It's not going to go from like 151.7 in 2019 to 105. We're not talking about that kind of jump, but it does have an impact on it where, you may look at, 7 to 8 yards difference when you look at what they do for Navy. So for example, last year, Notre Dame's rush defense gave up 131, as we said, 131.3 yards per game. If you take the Navy game out of the mix, Notre Dame is at 121, so about 10. If you look at 2021, you look at where Notre Dame's rush defense was that season. They gave up 135.5 yards per game. They gave up 166 to Navy. So if you take that game out of the equation, they were at 132.9, so it drops about 3 off. You look at 2019, Notre Dame gives up 151.7 yards per game. They gave up that season 281 to Navy. So you take that out of the equation, you're talking about a team that gave up 140.9. So it's not like all of a sudden you put the Navy game in there and they are where they are, and you take that out and all of a sudden they're this elite rush defense. That's not the case. But that's also why I like to point to the yards per attempt number, because the yards per attempt for Navy are usually in line with the rest of their season. This year they didn't play very well against Navy. They gave up 5.5 yards per carry. They only gave up 3.0 the year before. So the performance against Navy didn't have a bigger impact. I think when you look at the 2022 team, it's also interesting because the 2021 Notre Dame rush defense really struggled at the beginning and the end of the season. And then there was like one game in the middle. It was a very weird season. So Florida State rushed for 264 at the beginning. Oklahoma State went for 234 at the end. They both were over 5 yards per carry. And then in between there, you had the North Carolina game, which was 224 at 5.7. But in between those two stretches, you had a lot of really good run defense. Last year was a little bit more inconsistent, but a similar story. Marshall was not very good. Pretty good run defense the rest of the way. Bad against Navy, bad against USC. And then, of course, the first 2 games of the year, I should say, they weren't very good stopping the run. So you're seeing flashes from Notre Dame being a really good run defense, but they're not able to consistently do it. And they're also not able to keep teams. Again, it's the yards per game is one thing that's important. You got to get that down. One way to get that down, have a more explosive offense that goes out there and jumps on teams, and you win games more convincingly so teams can't run in the fourth quarter. So combined with taking Navy out, and combined with having an offense that's giving you more big game opportunities where you're really blowing people out, then all of a sudden you're going to be in a situation where teams can't focus on running the ball as much on you as they do other teams. You look at Georgia, for example, their rush defense the last 2 years has been tremendous. But if you look at what they do, they just jump on teams so quickly that it just takes you out of your ability to run the football at times. I mean, that's just something that's been an issue for them. They're a bit of an outlier when you look at the other teams on the schedule. I think one of the things that you'll learn pretty quickly when you break these teams down is when they are blowing teams out, a lot of times they don't give up a lot of yards. You look at LSU in 2019. What's funny about the numbers for LSU in 2019 is they ranked where they ranked, which I'll bring that back up. But they gave up 400 yards in a game that year against Ole Miss rushing the football. And that was one of their more competitive games of the season. They jumped all over Oklahoma. Oklahoma could only run for 97 yards. They jumped all over Georgia in the SEC title game, so Georgia only ran for 61 yards. Do any of us want to sit here and think that LSU's defense was so staunch in 2019 that they were able to hold Georgia and Oklahoma to under 100 yards. They were able to hold Texas A&M under 100 yards. They were able to hold Utah State under 100 yards and Northwestern State and Georgia Southern and all these teams 100 yards, only give up 102 to Mississippi State. No, what happened was those are games where they were blowing people out, and it allowed those teams to kind of have more yards. Alabama, for example, didn't run for a lot of yards that year, but they had one of the better yards per game attempt averages or yard per attempt averages against Alabama because it was a closer game. But even that game, part of the reason Alabama only ran for 123 yards that game is because LSU jumped all over them in the first half. They were blowing LSU or Alabama out in the first half, and then Georgia or Alabama was able to kind of to get back in the game. The Ole Miss game was a little bit more of a back and forth early. The Florida game was a little bit more competitive early. Florida was able to run for 146 yards. So the offense can help the Notre Dame defense. Limit the yards that way by limiting the defense. That's obviously a big part of what Notre Dame needs to do. But the other part of it to me is the yards per attempt. That's the bigger one. I want you to look at this again. So this is going to be this category right here that I'm highlighting right here. This area right here is what I'm talking about, yards per attempt. Not one team that has won a championship in the last 7 years has had a yards per attempt average allowed of higher than 3.7. Then when you look at Notre Dame has not had a single season in the last 7 years where they got to 3.7. Now, their two playoff teams were both 3.8, so they were close. And if you look at Notre Dame's yards per attempt average in the regular season, they were in that 3.7 category, I believe, both times in the regular season. Obviously, but what happened in the playoff, Notre Dame's defense was not able to stop those teams from being able to run the football effectively. Bama ran for 140 at 5.6 yards per attempt. Part of that was on a big run from Najee Harris. 2018, Clemson runs for 211 and 5.7 yards per attempt. So once they got to the postseason, they weren't as effective. So there's a couple things at play here. So then when we talk about, okay, we've identified the problem, right? Okay. So now it's about fixing it. Notre Dame's run defense has to get better. We declared it, right? So how? What are some things that they need to do? Well, there's a lot of easy answers you can give. Well, they got to be more disruptive. Okay. Well, that's not what's worked for Georgia. Georgia's not a team that's been a great tackle for loss team the last few years. If you look at where Georgia ranked last year in tackles for loss per game, Georgia ranked 58th last year in tackles per loss per game. If you look at their elite defense from 2021, they had a great defense in 2021. They ranked 37th in tackles for loss allowed. Okay, well, how can they be that and be disruptive, right? How can they be a team that is great against the run, but they don't create a lot of negatives? It really comes down to it. It's pretty simple, really. That's the type of defense that they play. You have to be able to look and say, who are you as a defense, and what allows you to be effective? Clemson's 2018 run defense, for example, if you look at them, that was a very good rush defense, gave up less than 100 yards per game. That year, Clemson ranked second nationally in yard and when I've given you the tackle for loss numbers, by the way, I'm giving you per game averages because the total number of games you play. I mean, Georgia's playing like 2 extra games than most people when they're winning titles. Same thing with Clemson. So Clemson tied for first in 2018 in total tackles for loss, but they were second behind Miami in per game. They had 9.1 tackles for loss per game. Well, Clemson had a defense that's a lot more disruptive. When they won the title in 2016, they gave up a decent amount of yards, but they ranked third nationally that year in tackles per loss per game and led the country in total tackles for loss. Their 2015 team that played for the national championship also led the nation in tackles for loss and ranked 5th in tackles for loss per game. And so those are aspects of it you have to look at and say, but that's where you need to be. You need to be a team that is disruptive. Well, Georgia's not, right? So there's those two balances. What does that mean for Notre Dame? What's the point of all this? It really comes down to Notre Dame has to make a decision on who they are. Who do you want to be as a defense? Do you want to be a team that is, big and physical and talented? That's what Georgia is, right? Georgia doesn't need to be a team that creates a lot of negatives because they create a lot of stuffs, a lot of 0-yard gains, a lot of 1-yard gains, a lot of 2-yard gains. You're just not getting any movement because they're a big physical 2-gapping team that just doesn't do a lot to create negatives. That's just kind of who Georgia is. That works for them. the years where Alabama was dominating and had great defenses, they were a team that also weren't elite when you consider what their numbers were as far as yards per game. I'll point you to the 2011 team that won a national championship. Their defense, they gave up 8 points a game that year. They gave up 72.2 rushing yards per game, which led the nation, but they were only 16th in yards and tackles for loss per game. They weren't an elite team when it came to creating tackles for loss. When you look at their 2012 team that beat Notre Dame, did not give up a lot of rushing yards, only gave up 76.4, but they were 47th in the country in tackles for loss per game. Who's their D coordinator? It's Kirby Smart. That's who they're doing now. So there's ways to do it. Now you look at Alabama, they're a lot more disruptive, but they're not good on defense. So Notre Dame has to figure out who they're going to be and then recruit to that. I believe that when you look at the players that Notre Dame is able to recruit, I understand that they're trying to get more nose tackles on the defense, and that's good. All right. You get Sean Chaviano, get Davion Dixon, give me some more beef, and that's fine at the nose tackle position. But overall, Notre Dame is going to have to be a team that has to understand, hey, in order for us to be an elite defense, we have to be a disruptive defense, because we're not going to have Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and those type of big 320-plus pound guys that are going out there and just two-gapping all game long, right? Ryan explained the difference between one-gapping and two-gapping the other day in our mailbag. Notre Dame's a team that's they're not going to be able to do that a whole lot. One of the frustrations I had last year, and it really hurt them in some of the bigger games, was Notre Dame was they just wouldn't turn their defensive line loose the way that I'd like to see them turn them loose. And one of the complaints that I've had about Notre Dame the last couple of years is they've actually been a pretty good team when it comes to sacks. Notre Dame has generated a lot of sacks the last couple of years, which had been an issue in past years. If you look at Notre Dame this past season, they ranked 13th in the nation in total sacks. And they ranked, let me see where it was, yards, sacks per game, 16th in sacks per game. 2021, Marcus Freeman's year's D coordinator, they ranked 12th in the nation in sacks per game. And they ranked, let's see here, Notre Dame in 2012, also 12th in total sacks. By far, the best sack numbers they'd had in quite some time. So 13th in total sacks in 2022, 12th in total sacks in 2021. Right? Seems great. Seems like you're a pretty disruptive defense. Well, in the pass game, they are. If you look at where Notre Dame ranked this year in tackles for loss, they ranked, let's see here, all the way down to 36th in tackles for loss, total tackles for loss, and they ranked 38th in tackles for loss per game. In 2021, total tackles for loss, they ranked 48th, and only had 82. And tackles that was total tackles for loss, and tackles for loss per game, they ranked 51st. When you're ranking 12th and 16th in sacks, and you're ranking all the way down in the 40s and 50s in tackles for loss, it means you're not a very disruptive team against the run. So if you're going to be an attacking, aggressive team, which I think Notre Dame needs to be, you have to be a team that's creating negatives in the run game. And so for Notre Dame, that means getting more athletic. I think from a personnel standpoint, they've taken steps to that. I think putting Riley Mills inside the three technique and then having a Javonte Jean-Baptiste, a Nana Osafo-Mensah, maybe some of the freshmen playing that field end position. Now you're in a situation where you may get a little smaller on the edge, but you're going to be more athletic and more disruptive. I think one of the things for Javonte Jean-Baptiste last season, for example, his game really took a jump from a run defense standpoint, and that's something he's going to have to carry into the 2023 season, because you have to still be able to be effective setting the edge at the field end position, and that's something that they've been pretty good at in recent seasons, but you have to be more disruptive from that position as well. Then inside, this is where the bigger problem has been for Notre Dame. They're not very big. They haven't been very big in the past. This year, they're much more big and physical this season than they should be last year, in my opinion. Howard Cross is going to be a little bit bigger. When you look at the others tackle spot, Riley Mills is going to be at least 10 pounds bigger than Jason Adamiola, and he's going to be a guy that is going to have a lot more girth than Jason Adamiola had. Jordan Botelho is not that much lighter than Isaiah Foskey, but he's also 3-4 inches shorter, and there's a little bit more stockiness there in the lower body. still not as big. So you got smaller on the edges, but you're going to be bigger up in the middle. You're going to have multiple. You're going to have a couple 300-pounders in your rotation this year, obviously with Gabriel Rubio, Aiden Keanaaina. You look at Jason Onye, who's going to be part of the rotation this year. He's 290 plus pounds. Tyson Ford, if he's able to battle and fight for a spot and get a spot, he's over 290 pounds. So you're talking about a defense going to have a little bit more beef up the middle, but they still are not a big defensive line. So what they need to do is kind of get away from some of the block occupying that they did last season and allow their defensive tackles to be more disruptive. I think that's a big part of who they need to be. I think when you look at who they're going to model themselves after as far as, okay, well, this team won this way. I think the Clemson teams that won in 18 and 16 have to be the model for Notre Dame because those teams ran the football effectively, especially the 18 team that rushed for 248 yards per game, only gave up 96.3. And when you look at their rush defense that season, they had a couple games they gave up yards, but really not a whole lot. They really didn't give up a ton of yards. I think Pitt's about the only team that ran on them, but Pitt only scored 10 points. Pitt was running late in the game. When the game was over, they knew they were going to win. They were just running it just to get out of the game. So they got a lot of their yards in that situation as well. But I think Clemson is a team that I look at and say that's sort of the model for what Notre Dame needs to be. And you look at their defensive line that year, they had 4 defensive linemen that were over 10 tackles for loss that season. That includes Christian Wilkins, who as a 3 technique had 15 tackles for loss in 15 games. That's 1 per game. So if he was at Notre Dame, that'd be 13, right? Because they play 13 most games. But he's a guy that was very disruptive. You look up the middle. Obviously, Dexter Lawrence had 7.5 tackles for loss in 13 games. He was part of their interior rotation. But then you also had Niles Pinckney, who had 4.5. Albert Huggins had 3.5. Jordan Williams had 3. Those are all their defensive tackles. And then you look at Notre Dame this season, and their defensive tackles aren't putting up those kind of numbers. So let's just do some quick math here real quick. So you had 15 from Christian Wilkins, 7.5 from Dexter Lawrence. That's 22.5. You have 4.5 from Niles Pinckney. That's 27. You have 3.5 and 3 from Albert Huggins and Jordan Williams. That's 33.5. So that's your rotation at defensive tackle. Let's look at Notre Dame. So what did we say? 33.5? Is that what we said there for that one? Let's look at Notre Dame this season and their defensive tackles. Riley Mills had 6 as an part-time end inside guy. So let's look at Riley's production here real quick because he was a defensive tackle most at the end of the season. So we'll count those. So he had 1.5 tackles for loss in the bowl game as a defensive tackle. So we'll give him that. So that's 1.5. Jason Ademilola only had 6. That's 7.5. Gabriel Rubio had 4. It's 11.5. Justin Ademilola was an outside guy. Howard Cross had 2.5. So let's see. I'm going to lose track here. So we got 1.5 by Riley, 6 by Jason Ademilola. You have 4 by Gabriel Rubio. You have 2.5 by Howard Cross, 2 by Jacob Lacey. Who else was an inside guy? Chris Smith had 0.5 tackle for loss. So that's 11.5. That's 14. That's 16. 16.5. Notre Dame's defensive tackles had 16.5 tackles for loss last season. That Clemson defense in 2018, which was a phenomenal defense, right? They're the extreme of it, but they had 33.5 tackles for loss as a unit. So Notre Dame has to start climbing in that direction when it comes to their production. So if you're going to be a defense like Notre Dame that's undersized, that's going to be about speed, attacking, flying downhill, having linebackers are going to be doing a lot of pressures and a lot of stunts, there's 2 ways you can do it. One is to have the defensive linemen eat up blocks so the linebackers can blitz. I don't particularly think that fits what Notre Dame does very well. If Al Golden is allowed to adjust his blitz packages, come out and say, hey, we're going to attack with our defensive line and then do our pressures off of that, sort of like what Ohio State did to Notre Dame last year, I think you're going to see a team that not only creates more negatives in tackles from a tackles for loss in the run game standpoint, which means fewer yards, which means fewer yards for play because you're going to create more negatives, right? The way to have fewer yards per play is to create more minuses. And this isn't rocket science here. But what that also is going to do is then lead into other areas that are going to impact the defense. So, for example, Notre Dame is not great at being disruptive last year against the run game, which meant teams could stay sort of on schedule for the season. That led Notre Dame to being a team that wasn't very good at forcing turnovers. It's not a coincidence that those two things went together. Now, you look at Notre Dame last year and their red zone defense. Well, guess what? Part of the reason they weren't very good in their red zone defense is because they couldn't stop the run. They were 49th on third down. You're not going to be a great third down defense like they were in 2021 when they ranked 10th in third down defense. But when teams are running the football on you for solid chunks, 3 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards, and you're not creating a lot of negatives, then they're going to be in more third and short situations that are going to make it a little bit more manageable to handle. And so you get teams in more third and longs. It's more obvious pass plays. You can adjust your coverages for it. That means more pass breakups. That means more sacks. That means more interceptions. It means better field position. And it then gets your offense on the field more. So I think those are things that I look at and say, this is where the Notre Dame run defense needs to get better, be more aggressive with your front, allow your linebackers to attack. I'm all for that. I'm a big fan of run stunts. And a run stunt for me is 4 defensive linemen doing different types of twists, or 4 defensive linemen doing what they're doing, and then inserting a fifth player being the linebacker as part of that conversation as well. I'm all for that stuff. But if all you're doing with your defensive linemen is asking them to eat up blocks so your linebackers can get pressures, that's not going to work. That may work against some of the teams on your schedule that aren't that good. That's not going to work against the better teams on your schedule. So that's an adjustment that we need to see from Notre Dame this year. And then the final piece to this is you got to tackle better. There's a lot of opportunities last year for Notre Dame's defensive linemen and linebackers to make more plays behind the line of scrimmage than they did. And they didn't make a ton, but there was more opportunities to do so. And when you get in those situations, you have to hit home. We started to see a little bit of improvement from a disruptiveness standpoint late last year from the linebacker level. I've broken this down before recently on the message board. If you look at J.D. Bertrand's numbers over the last 6 games of the year, his numbers were very impressive from a tackles for loss standpoint. So in JD's last 6 games of the season, he finished the year with 8.5 tackles for loss, which is a decent number for 12 games. But if you look at his total numbers, he had 6.5 tackles for loss in the last 6 games alone, as he started to get more comfortable in the defense compared to just 2 in the first 6 games of the season. So obviously getting more from him and the other linebackers is going to help. But at the end of the day, you still need a lot more from your defensive tackles. If they're more disruptive, it's going to make the linebackers more disruptive. And if the defensive tackles are more disruptive and the linebackers are making more plays and you're creating more negatives against the run, you're going to be a team that's better on third down. You're going to be a team that's better in the red zone. You're going to be a team that's better at forcing turnovers. All of that circle, to me, all of it ties back to being great against the run, whether you're an attacking defense or a team that just is like a brick wall like Georgia. Either way, the end result is the same. You're going to be a great third down defense. You're going to be a team that doesn't give up a lot of points, whether that's a team that forces a lot of turnovers like Notre Dame needs to be, or a team that just forces a lot of punts like Georgia is. Either way, you're going to have a really, really good situation when it comes to being a great run defense. And that is a key to me still today of being a great defense and a championship caliber defense. And that's what Notre Dame's trying to get to. Let's get to topic number 2 today. And I think this is one that people I think are going to enjoy a little bit. We're going to talk about CJ Carr. We're going to have a little bit of fun with CJ Carr today, talking about his game. And I got to tell y'all, listening to what I listened to today was just kind of explaining why CJ Carr is ranked where he is by On3. I really don't understand it. It was a lot of kind of contradicting yourself. There was a lot of very revealing things that are not positive. I took from that a lot more emphasis is being placed on what CJ does at camps than what he has done on film. The interviewer kept trying to kind of bring it back to his season, and there just wasn't a lot of talk about that. Then he starts talking about how he throws a lot of quick. There just was a lot of nonsense, to be completely honest with you. And there's a reason that ranking is much different than others. And I think it's a situation, and I've talked about this with CJ Carr, and there's a lot of people pissed off about his ranking with On3. And I wanted to address that, wanted to get into where I think CJ should be ranked. And then we're going to have some fun watching CJ's film, because it's always fun to watch CJ Carr play on film. So number 1, when you look at CJ Carr's ranking, Rivals has him ranked number 21 in the nation. ESPN has him ranked number 35. 247 Sports has him ranked number 36th. I think those are all pretty fair rankings. I would probably have him closer to rivals. I don't. I won't say that for sure. He earned a 4.5. Wait a minute, hold on. Is CJ? Did he get a? I forget what his grade was on Irish Breakdown. Let me just go look real quick. I think he's a 5-star on the Irish Breakdown board, but I just want to be sure here real quick. Yes, he's a 5-star, which is a top 25 caliber player. So obviously the rivals ranking makes sense. That's about where I would have him. Now, does that mean he's going to be number 5 or number 25, number 27, number 28? That remains to be seen because I haven't finished my rankings yet for the 2024 class. But to me, the floor has to be like that 35 to 40 range. Then you have On 3. And they have CJ ranked as the number 192 quarterback in the country and the number 14 quarterback in the class. And I think there can be some discussion with CJ if you're someone, and one of the things that they talk about is, well, we look at NFL draft for rankings. Well, so does 247 and so does Rivals, and they don't have him ranked as low as you do. Then you look at it and say, well, okay, but he doesn't have a huge arm. Okay, well, neither does Aaron Noland, who you just jumped all the way up to the number 40s after what he did this summer. Everyone that I've talked to that was there, everything that I've read about the Elite 11 is CJ Carr and Aaron Noland were kind of right here, kind of back and forth. Most people had Aaron just slightly better than CJ, but from a style of play standpoint, they're the same kid. I mean, they're smart. They read defense as well. I'm going to get to that in a second. They're accurate. They throw with great timing. Aaron Noland puts up a lot better numbers because he plays in a system that allows him to put up a lot better numbers. And I got the impression that was part of the conversation as well. The funniest part for me was when he said, and I mean funny, not as in like ha ha funny, but just what was when the guy said that CJ doesn't handle live defenses very well. He kept talking about whatever they did at the Elite 11. Number one, that's not what I was told by people who were there. I can't really argue with that though, because I wasn't there. People that I know watched him there and came away with a completely different impression of how he did in those settings. So whatever. But here's the thing. At an Elite 11, that's not a live defense. That's 7-on-7, where CJ Carr has been phenomenal all summer. But the other part is that's still not a live defense. A 7-on-7 defense is not a live defense. A live defense is one that can sack you. And so the fact that he was relying as much as he was on the Elite 11 stuff, I found puzzling and really misguided, to be completely honest with you. I think it shows a big flaw in the process. Camp film, and I don't care if you've only seen him in person at a camp, that should never trump the film. There's this movement amongst younger evaluators that, I got to see a guy in person, and that's fine. I'm all for seeing people in person. I would always prefer to see a guy in person if you can. But seeing a guy in person at a non-game situation should never trump what the film tells you. That's why people make mistakes at the NFL scouting combine. That's why people make mistakes based off pro day workouts. That's how I remember this with Ronald Jones several years ago with Rivals. He was a highly ranked kid. I think he was a 5-star, goes to some Rivals camp. There's like 30 backs there. He doesn't get a whole lot of reps. He drops a couple passes, doesn't really stand out because he didn't get a lot of opportunities. And so they dropped him like out of the top 100. This is a kid that rushed for almost 3,000 yards as a junior in high school in Texas. Goes out as a senior, has another like 26, 27, 2,800 yard year in Texas. Then he goes to the Under Armour All-American bowl, and balls out all week in practice, has a big run in the game, and all of a sudden his ranking goes back up. Well, it should have stayed there. But the problem was you put too much emphasis in a camp that you had, and that impacted your ranking and allowed you to ignore a kid that had rushed for like over 4,000 yards coming into that season and who had film. Forget the production, because production can be a little misleading, but then the film shows an elite talent. And of course, Ronald Jones goes to college, and that's exactly what he was. And he's a high draft pick and all that other kind of stuff. There's too much emphasis, in my opinion, from the recruiting services on what they do at camps. Having said that, the camp evaluation of CJ Carr from everybody else is still different than this guy. It'd be one thing if everybody kind of was like, CJ didn't have the greatest Elite 11 performance, but we cared more about film. That's not what's happening here. His evaluation of CJ Carr was way different. And I talked to a guy that was like, dude, I stood right by the guy the entire time CJ was working out. I know he saw exactly what I saw. I don't know what he's doing. So I don't know if it's personal for him. I really can't give you the motivations. I just don't think he's very good at evaluating quarterbacks, to be completely honest with you. This is a guy that had Dante Moore ranked really low last year. And then he says in the interview that, well, Dante dominated at the All-Star game, so we jumped him back up in the rankings. Think about that for a second, folks. Think about that. Think about what that means. So Dante Moore goes out, plays 4 years of high school football, leads his team to a championship, dominant player at camps, dominant player in 7-on-7s, had good performances, put up big numbers, all the stuff that we saw that made him a 5-star recruit. It wasn't until a freaking all-star game, because this guy saw him in person, that Dante goes and shows that, hey, I'm an elite player. And even then, they only jumped him up to number 20, but they at least gave him a 5-star. But he was like around 50 going into that. Well, everybody else had Dante Moore, and it's the top 5 guy. So it shows a flaw in the process, but it also shows a flaw in your ability to evaluate quarterbacks. The fact that someone could watch watch Dante Moore and Jackson Arnold and rank Jackson Arnold ahead of Dante Moore tells me you don't know how to evaluate quarterbacks. When you look at CJ Carr and you're going to tell me that there are 13 quarterbacks in this class better than him, and then you're going to say in sort of like a backhanded, it was a comment that he made that was almost like an insult to CJ without saying it about CJ. He starts talking about how this isn't a very good quarterback class, and all. So it's not a good quarterback class, and you think CJ Carr is the 14th best quarterback in the class. I just thought it was a very strange interview. When I look at some of the quarterbacks they have ranked ahead of CJ, you just kind of scratch your head and you're just like, I don't really know what we're doing here at this point in time. And the other part is there's a lack of consistency. Things that he'll knock CJ for, he doesn't knock other players with a very similar physical skill set to CJ. So you just start getting to the point where you just feel like there's something personal here, because this evaluation is so far off compared to what other people do. And so they dropped Jaden Davis way down because Jaden Davis had a really bad Elite 11 performance. CJ Carr did not have a bad Elite 11 performance, so according to anyone except this one guy. So it comes a point in time where either A, you're terrible at evaluating quarterbacks, or B, there's something personal here with CJ that's making you say this. I texted a coach friend of mine who's a coach at a Power 5 schools, very familiar with CJ. And I told him what this guy said, and he was just like, that's one of the worst things I've ever seen. Like, I mean, it's about as dumb as it can get is the comment that I got about it. So you look at it and it's just, there's not a lot of people that think this. And so that's the outlier. So what I would like to do is we're addressing it here today. We'll talk about CJ. We'll talk about the rankings. We'll talk about the flaws and the explanation. I don't want to keep talking about it after today. I'm addressing it today so that we can move on. Because a couple things about the guy that does the rankings and about On3. I think he's way off on CJ. I don't know if he's not good at evaluating quarterbacks, if it's personal. He could just be wrong. I don't know the answer. The one thing I want us to do, or the two things I want us to do, is number one, I want us to stop overall talking about CJ Carr, CJ Carr's rankings with On3. I want overall to stop talking about On3 in general. But the point is I hear from people, and we've refuted this before, there's a bias in his rankings towards Notre Dame. And I don't really think that's it. I think there's a bias with CJ Carr. I think that's the issue. I think the bias is with CJ Carr. There's something there with him that makes it seem very personal when it comes to CJ, and where he's being critical of CJ in areas where he's not applying the same criteria to other people. When you're not applying that, that tells me there's some sort of personal bias that you have about this particular player for some reason. But there's also plenty of Notre Dame guys that he has ranked higher than everybody else. He has Keidron Young as a top 100 player. Anthony Knapp is a 4-star top 200 player. Styles Prescott is a 4-star top 200 player. There's several guys he has ranked higher. He had a terrible ranking last year for Drake Bowen and Jaden Alsbury. Terrible ranking. Like, stupid ranking. But he also has Ohio State commit Peyton Pierce ranked as a 3-star and outside the top 100 in the state of Texas. he doesn't have Kingston Viliama-Asa ranked in the top 300. The guy's not good at evaluating linebackers. It's as simple as that, right? It's not personal about Notre Dame. It affects Notre Dame at that position. It affects Notre Dame at quarterback. CJ Carr should be ranked as at least a top 50 player. That hurts Notre Dame's overall ranking. So there is an impact on Notre Dame when he's this wrong. To not have it Jaden Osbury as a top 100 player, to not have Drake Bowen as top 100 players was a mistake. But he also had Jeremiah Love ranked higher than anybody else. Charles Jagusah ranked higher than everybody else. Sullivan Absher, I believe, ranked higher than everybody else. So when you look at it from that standpoint, we have to be willing to say, I think you're wrong. I think you're wrong for this reason. Here's what I see. Without it always turning it into, this guy hates Notre Dame. Because if you really break down the On3 rankings, there is no Notre Dame bias. They're, I think, 7th. I think the stat we had the other day, I actually did the research on this on the message board, and I think the number was like 7 of Notre Dame's 20 commits. On3 has ranked higher than everybody else, and there's another 4 or 5 that they have ranked second highest over everybody else. So Rivals was closest. Rivals had, I think, 6 guys ranked higher than everybody else. They have Peter Jones ranked higher than everybody else. Bronte Johnson ranked higher than everybody else. CJ Carr ranked higher than everybody else. I think Cam Williams, I believe, is also ranked higher than everybody else on On3. So I'm actually going to pull this up real quick and just give you guys the data. So On3 has CJ Carr On3 has Cam Williams ranked higher than everybody else. They have Kedron Young ranked higher than everybody else. They have Logan Thomas ranked higher than everybody else. They're second for Micah Gilbert. They are second for Aeneas Williams. They have Styles Prescott ranked higher than everybody else. Bryce Young ranked higher than everybody else. They have Anthony Knapp ranked higher than everybody else. And there's one more, I believe, like a lower ranked guy that's not real high. I think Kennedy Urlacher or somebody like that. Tabron Benny Powell is the other guy. So there's 7 right there that they have ranked higher than everybody else. And then actually, I think you could make a case for Teddy Rizak from a positional standpoint, but they have him lower than the state of Nebraska, so I don't really count him. So that's 7. And then Rivals is I think next one behind. So Rivals has CJ Carr higher than everybody else, Bronte Johnson higher than everybody else. They're second for Kedron Young. They are second for Logan Thomas. They have Aeneas Williams ranked higher than everybody else. They have Peter Jones ranked higher than everybody else. They have Leonard Moore ranked higher than everybody else. They have Bodie Cahoon ranked higher than everybody else. And actually, they have Jack Larson of the non-top 300 guys, Fonan Bodie and Jack Larson. So they're actually tied with. So there's not a bias towards Notre Dame there. There is a poor quarterback evaluation problem that has been consistent with this guy, in my opinion, the last few years. So if we can have the conversation, and I'm all for it, as far as where should CJ be ranked, but I want us to kind of stop every time there's a negative ranking about Notre Dame to say that there's a bias about everybody. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not bias. I think there's a bias in 247's rankings. That's me personally, because I see a trend that's happening there with Notre Dame players after they commit, seeing a big drop in their rankings. That, to me, is a problem. When I look at On3's recent rankings updates, some guys went up, some guys went down. I thought, again, there's a lot I don't agree with, but there was no trends that are anti-Notre Dame trends. And that is the case with Rivals in the past, and then also with 247 now. I think 247 is really the only one that I look at right now, and I say that's a clear Notre Dame bias in what they're doing. That's my opinion in it. Okay. So let's stop with the whole he hates Notre Dame. I don't think he hates Notre Dame. I think there's a CJ Carr bias is more so what the problem is with him. Here's where I think he gets it wrong. I think he undersells CJ's physical tools. I think CJ Carr doesn't get nearly enough credit for people who only see him at camp settings for his athleticism and playmaking ability. I think CJ's arm talent is better than given credit for by some of these people. I think his accuracy is outstanding. I think the notion that he doesn't play well, that he doesn't read defenses well and doesn't play well against live defense, because that's what that means, right? If you say someone doesn't handle live situations well, what you're saying is they don't read defenses very well. I think that's incredibly misguided. There's things you can say about CJ that I would say, hey, that's a fair thing. He's not the biggest kid. He's 6'2.5". He's kind of skinny. He's got a decent muscular that situation there, but like he's still on the skinny side. Doesn't have a great frame. He's not going to be 225 pounds when it's all said and done. I'm trying to figure out what Rita's doing right now. She's walking behind me. I don't know where she's going. Oh, there she went. My wife's out of town, so Rita's down here today because it's storming and she gets a little scared during the storms. So I apologize for that little disruption. I think CJ's not the biggest kid. His arm is not a bazooka. That was also a thing that we would say about Dante last year. I think that can be a little bit overrated, in my opinion. I think obviously if you can have a strong arm, great, but there's a lot of great quarterbacks in college without it. So even if you're looking at it from an NFL standpoint, there's guys ranked much higher than CJ Carr whose arm strength is not any better than what CJ Carr's is, and some that are their arms aren't as strong as CJ Carr's. So I think that's another one. And I think the biggest one that he got wrong is the one I heard today. He said he doesn't think CJ Carr handles live situations very well. I thought that was probably one of the more absurd things that you could say about CJ. I have been told by people at Elite 11s. I've been told by coaches in the business, multiple coaches in the business. I've been told by a lot of different people that know this stuff. It's one of the smartest kids that you're going to find. And that's not just on the board, but that's what you see on film as well. So I don't get where that comes from. I think CJ Carr is a clear 5-star talent. I think especially for me, I do college rankings. I could understand someone who bases their rankings off of NFL. I could understand them not having CJ Carr as a 5-star. I could, because of the body. I think that's the big thing for me. I don't base rankings off of that. I base rankings off of what I think guys are going to be in college, because that's what you should be evaluating high school players for, is what they're going to be in college. Then let the NFL evaluators rank and grade guys for what they're going to be going in the NFL. I think it's kind of silly to be looking at it, especially when you're doing like younger class rankings. So you're telling me when you are looking at, that's a great question, Jay Carr, but you're telling me when you're looking at a kid who's a 2025 player, so a rising junior in high school, you're telling me that you're looking at that kid based on what you think he's going to be in the National Football League? He's 16 years old. That's an absurd thing for me. So I don't do that. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think it should be about we're ranking kids based off what they're going to be in college. I think part of the reason they do that is because it's easier to grade and evaluate your ranking when you say 5-star, X number of NFL draft picks, or we had this guy ranked here, he was drafted here, where otherwise you're just trying to evaluate, okay, what kind of college career do they have? I don't know. Maybe that's it. I don't understand why they do it. I think it's kind of silly. I think you should be evaluating high school prospects and projecting them to what they're going to be in college. That's what the Irish Breakdown rankings are. When we do our grade, that's what the CFB Nation rankings will be. When we eventually launch that channel and launch those rankings, it will be about what we project them to be in college. I don't care if a guy is not a good NFL player. Doesn't matter to me a lick. What I care about is what they are in college. We've seen a lot of great high school college football players that just weren't big-time NFL prospects for whatever reason, because the NFL is looking for different things in college football. And that's what our rankings are going to be. But I could understand someone doing that type of ranking saying, I don't know if I want to put CJ Carr where Dylan Raiola is, because Dylan Raiola has got a thicker body. He's over 200 pounds. He's got, a sturdier lower body. He's got a bigger arm. That's fine. Whatever. You can do that. I'm okay with that. I really am, as long as that's your criteria. The issue for me when it comes to CJ Carr and on 3 is there's an inconsistency in the application of the criteria. So when you look at the other services, the ones that have him 35th and 36th, I'm okay with that. I'm fine. I would have him a little higher. I have him as a 5-star, but I'm truly okay with that. He needs to be no lower than 50, in my view, if you're going to look at it for on 3. So that's where I would have CJ Carr. That's where I think the misguided nature is. And we're going to wrap this thing up by watching a little film of CJ Carr, and we'll see. We'll just remind ourselves what kind of player that Notre Dame is getting here, because as we've talked about before, this is not only a great leader of the class, also Cam Williams is a great leader in the class. Jack Larson's a great leader in the class. So we're loving that. Carson Hobbs. But this is also a very talented football player. So let's get into CJ Carr's film a little bit. We're going to have a little fun with this before we dive into the mailbag. For those who joined late, Ryan is on the back end today. He's actually able to star some questions, and he's going to bring them in. So Ryan's going to be able to help out the mailbag today. So we actually will have a mailbag today. So if you want to get some questions in, feel free to get that in. But let's watch a little CJ Carr film here. So again, just to wrap up before we do this, let's kind of move on from the on-3 CJ Carr conversation. It is what it is. I don't really care moving forward what the ranking is. They're going to do what they're going to do. We have our ranking where we are. I think it's time for us to move on. And every time they come up with a new ranking, we don't need to obsess over what this guy says about CJ Carr. So if you think he's a 5-star, that's all that matters. If I think he's a 5-star, that's all that matters to me. Right. So let's move on. But I think the one thing we can all agree on is CJ Carr's a heck of a football player. So that's what the focus is going to be on moving forward when it comes to CJ and the conversations that we're going to have about him. So let's watch some film, folks. I think one of the things that also I gathered from listening to him is that he looks at the numbers. Like Aaron Nolan had some monster numbers in high school, but he plays in an offense that's a lot more involved, I guess, throwing the football. CJ doesn't play in that kind of offense. The thing I think that we saw, the thing I saw from CJ as a junior is I saw a little bit more zip on the football this past season. He's always thrown with really nice touch. That's a nice ball right there. That's a far hash outcut. See where the ball is. 1st and 10. This is a 10-plus yard outcut. It's about 13-yard outcut that he throws from the far hash with good zip, good velocity. Doesn't have to muscle it. He's always thrown with really good touch. Last year, I thought, because I did not have CJ as a 5-star after a sophomore year. I just didn't think he had the elite physical tools for it. I thought he was a really good high school player. What we're seeing now is a kid that's got a little he saw a jump in the arm strength. The ball gets up and gets down a lot quicker. His ability to attack the middle of the field improved because he throws a lot more zip and velocity. We saw him throwing more of the outcuts and the comebacks and things along those lines. He's always been this. This is something I've always loved about him, is he's a kid that's really good about using his legs to make plays. Here he is throwing the ball from about the 25, about the 23-yard line, gets down to about the other 20-yard line. So that's about a 50-yard throw and moving around. This is something I like too. This is one of the throws you saw more of from CJ last year. Really quick arm strength. He doesn't have to, or really quick arm release. He doesn't have to really drive off that back foot. He doesn't drive off his back foot at all. He slides, he drops back, he slides, and he just flicks the ball out there. That is a rope. All right. So he's throwing that ball from about the 30-yard line. That ball is getting caught, let's see, past the 50. That ball is getting caught at about the other 45, 50 yard, 30 yard, 40 yard, about the other 40-yard line. Guys, that's a rope that he throws with very little effort, leads the guy out there, and it gets there in a hurry. Not hardly any arc on that ball at all. He's able to get there before that other safety. You can see the safety to the right over here. He reads CJ and he tries to get over there, but the ball gets there so fast that the guy gets hit, but he's not drilled once the ball arrives. That's a heck of a throw right there. And so when people tell me they just don't think CJ's got a great arm, that I just don't see that, right? I just don't see that. I think he's got plenty of arm strength and arm talent, and those two things are not the same. This is a nice ball right here, really good ball placement. He can't lead this guy. If he leads this guy, it's gonna get drilled. The corner's playing over the top. If you lead him, the corner can make a play on this ball. By putting that ball in the back shoulder, he forces the corner to run through this guy. Heck of a play right there. Very good timing and very good ball placement. That's exactly where you need that ball to be in this. Here he is again. I love the way he protects the football when he steps into the pocket. He doesn't always do that. You see that little dip and rip. Keeps his eyes downfield. That's one of the things I'm most impressed by with CJ Carr. And that's why when I hear someone say he doesn't read defenses very well, I just kind of get a little puzzled by that, because it's like, that's a little wild to me. Now, again, to prove he doesn't have an anti-Notre Dame bias, he did rave about Kenny Minchie and how he thinks actually maybe Kenny should have been ranked a little bit higher and could end up being their best quarterback. So here's again, he's using his feet, keeping his eyes downfield, finds a receiver open. That's a tough throw. You can watch CJ here. You can see his eyes going through his progressions. He's not a first read guy. This is another one right here, right? He's working. He's looking downfield. Nobody's there. Let's find that backside check down, get the ball out. That's a good feel for the game, good read. You can see him going through the process as he reads the defense to the left. Safety, the middle safety right here stays with the seam. So basically what he's going to read here is this safety right here. This safety's kind of in that zone where he can impact. He's on the near hash. So if at the snap, the corner squats and this safety goes over top, that throw may not be there, so he's going to look field side. Well, once he sees that safety go over to the right, he comes right back, bangs the go route, and shows absolutely great ball placement on that throw. Throws it from the 25, ball gets caught at about the other 30. That's a 45-yard toss from the near hash. That's a good chuck right there. Good ball placement, drops it right on a dime, right over the outside shoulder for a big play. Really impressive play by CJ. Another one of the things is somebody had said, I didn't hear him say this. I didn't listen to the whole interview. Somebody told me he doesn't throw the ball well on the run. I think that's a really absurd thing to say. This is a really tough throw as well. It's moving around. You got a dude in your face. Throws the ball from about the 22-yard line out to midfield. Gets out there, lets the guy run with it. That's an impressive throw. That's a really impressive throw. So we'll see. Yeah. That's some really weird takes here. Watch him as he's moving around here, keeps his eyes down the field. He doesn't get his This is a huge thing for me as a quarterback evaluator. I like to see when a guy is being pressured, do his eyes go down on the pressure, or do they feel the pressure, right? Use your peripheral to see the pressure, get moving around and keep your eyes downfield. CJ does a great job with that. Very good touch here, right? You can see him going through the progression, finds that backside over route, throws over the top. Really impressive ball right here by CJ. Really impressive ball. Good timing. I love the feel here, right? Guy tries to make a play. Really good in football IQ is really high. Really high. I've said this before. I think CJ Carr and Aaron Noland are very clearly the two smartest quarterbacks in this class. Just, yeah. Yeah. Very good feel for the game. I think both of those kids have a great feel. He just plays in a different offense. It's a really nice back shoulder here from the far hash. This isn't like a tough throw, but I love the ball placement here. Very good ball placement. You see a lot of that from CJ. The accuracy is very good. This is the stuff that I don't think he gets enough credit for. This is junior film, by the way, for those asking. He is a very athletic kid, very quick feet. He can run. He can avoid pressure. He's a much better athlete than he gets credit for. Good touch here. It's a great ball. This doesn't require. I mean, this is a 25-ish yard throw as far as down the field, but he's doing it from the far. High school hashes are further apart. So this is a far hash throw, just drops it right over top, right on a dime. There's not a darn thing the defender can do about it. It's a great ball right there. It's another good ball. A little underthrown. I'd like to see just get that over the top a little bit more. That ball, it's one of those ones where projection-wise, if there's a better defender there, that might get broken up. You want to get that one out there. Kind of telegraphs that one a little bit. Get that out there a little bit more. Here's another one. CJ using his legs to go by time. This is a really good ball. This receiver's kind of coming from across the other side of the field, and CJ throws him open. This is a really, really impressive film. Let's see a little bit more CJ's film here. This is one of his tougher throws. This is a really nice zip. I saw this. So it doesn't show it here as much, but there's one of his games this year was online, and this was one of the throws in that game. And it was a rope. It was a really impressive throw. You couldn't really tell from that angle. It was a really impressive throw. This is a bomb. This is from the 40-yard line, throws it to the other inside the 10. That's a 50-yard throw on the run. It's an impressive throw for a high school junior. So when people tell me they don't think he's got a big arm, well, I mean, compared to Dylan Raiola, sure. Yeah, I agree with that. Compared to DJ Lagway, absolutely correct. I think DJ Lagway actually might have the most powerful arm in the class, but it is plenty strong enough, in my opinion. So you see that there. Good feel for the game. Another criticism I heard, I didn't hear this one, but somebody said that he throws a lot of quick game. I'm not seeing a ton of quick game in this highlight, to be honest with you. I'm seeing a guy that throws the ball down the field quite a bit. So I think the kid's an outstanding football player. I'm having fun watching this film. Really nice ball there. Good zip. This is one of those ones where the way that corner's playing, you can't lead them. You've got a safety coming over top. The corner's trying to play high. You've got to put this ball right on him, but you've got to throw this ball on time. This is something that CJ does a great job of. His timing is really outstanding. If he waits another second to throw this ball, that safety might get over there. I don't care who's playing safety right there. This ball, the way that this ball's thrown, the velocity off his back foot, and the way that he throws it with zip, but the timing of it is really important and makes it a great throw, in my opinion. So you see a lot of that stuff from CJ. Really understands the need to change up velocity, angles, not of his arm, but angles of just where the ball needs to be, right? And does this need to be a little bit of touch? Does this need to be over the top? Does this need to be low and away? And then of course he can throw off platform as well. He's not like Dante. Dante Moore was great at that. CJ doesn't do it quite as much as Dante, but he can do it. He can certainly do it. And this is protect the ball a little bit. I don't want to see stuff like that as far as I'd coach him up on that. But I love the playmaking instincts that he has. This is one of those ones, right? This is an outcut. If you zip this sucker out there, there's a guy right there. He throws it with good timing, not great timing, but good timing because he comes back to this, right? He's reading back to the back cut. This actually is not even a great read to me because you have a defender under there, but he's got such a great feel for the game. He knows exactly the velocity and touch he needs to put on the football, gets it over top, throws it with good timing, not great, but good timing, and it's a complete pass. And it's a projectable throw as well. That's a projectable read that he's going to make at the next level. Here's another deep ball. I think here's the other thing about CJ. So this ball, he throws this from about, what's that look like? About the 12, 13, 14 yard line. Ball lands at about the other 45. It's 37. That's over a 40-yard throw from middle of the field. But the thing is, he throws it with such good timing. He just hits his drop. He knows where he's going. There's not the safety can't get over there. Hit your drop, let her rip. Yeah, you're not going to see guys throw a ton of balls over 50 yards in games. You really are rarely going to see it. Maybe one or two a game, maybe. Sam Howell's another guy. Sam Hartman, excuse me, and does not have a cannon for an arm, but he's a great deep ball thrower because he's accurate. He knows when to get rid of. The timing is really good. Ball placement and timing. If I hold the ball too long, I got to throw it 60. But if I get rid of the ball on time, I only got to throw it 45. And that's really where you want to be. The longer you hold it and the further the ball has to travel to is the more time that the safety has to get over to the football. That's the other part of it too. Really nice play right here. So we're going to get close to this. This is one of his, I love this. He looks like he's going to dip out of bounds and then just cuts it up for a big run. I think it got called back, but yeah, it was an impressive play right there. Kid has a great feel for the game. He really does. So that's CJ Carr. That's Notre Dame's quarterback in the 2024 class. And I tell you what, Notre Dame has quickly changed their fortunes at quarterback with the 23 and 24 class. Well, getting Kenny Minchey in last year's class was huge for Notre Dame. The way the whole process went down, they could have been stuck without a great quarterback in a great quarterback class, and they ended up getting a really good player. We had Kenny as a top 100 player last year. And getting CJ Carr a year after the class after, even though CJ committed early, has really changed my outlook for Notre Dame at quarterback to where if one of those two kids is your starting quarterback in the future, you're going to be pretty good. So that's something to certainly be excited about, and was sort of a parting gift from Tommy Rees was to leave Notre Dame with those two kids at quarterback. So that's it for CJ Carr, folks. And I just wanted, like I said, I wanted to kind of discuss that and just get it out there. It's being talked a lot about on the boards. It's being talked a lot about by people that I'm friends with or reach out. Oh, can you believe this? And trust me, I get it. It's absurd. And there are certain ramifications of it. Your recruiting class is going to be considered ranked as high if people aren't ranked properly. Notre Dame's recruiting class would look a lot different right now if people, in my opinion, people ranked Cole Mullins appropriately and Leonard Moore appropriately and some of these other players appropriately. I think their rankings would be a lot higher. They don't, and it is what it is. So the fact is I don't think Charles Powers, I think is the guy's name, right? I don't think his opinion has anything to do with CJ Carr, nor does mine. CJ Carr is going to be who he is. And that's what matters. And if you think CJ Carr is a heck of a player, then at the end of the day, that's what matters. And that's what I'm excited about. And that's what I'm happy about. And that's what our focus should be on. So we're going to move on to the mailbag next. But I just wanted to dive into that topic today in hopes of us being able to kind of move on past it and move on past the On3 rankings and things like that and change the narrative a little bit and be critical of this evaluation, be critical of the evaluation of Kingston Aviliamasa without just kind of taking the sort of the easy route out of bias against Notre Dame. It's that sometimes. It's not that in this case, in my opinion. So that's our CJ Carr conversation. So it's mailbag time, everybody. Let's dive into this. We're going to do this here for about 40 minutes or so. So let's rock and roll. Ryan, are you ready to go? So let's get going. We have a super chat or super sticker from Mitchell Coney. Mitchell, I appreciate that very, very much. Thank you for that. I don't think there's a question that followed. Rob Osgood asked, if you were the DC, what alignment and who would you put in the game if the game, excuse me, who would you put in if the game was on the line and you need a run stop for question's sake? Fourth and 3 at the Notre Dame 45, Notre Dame up by 6 with 1 minute left and no timeout. So this helps me a little bit because I believe, Rob, in this situation, I can somewhat zero in on the circumstance. So the other team is now in Notre Dame territory. It's 4th down at the 45. They're 4th and 3 at the 45. I would imagine in the situation, they're going to be in somewhat of a spread you out type of set. I doubt a team is going to want to go and try to play necessarily big boy football on Notre Dame, although it's possible that they could want to get a situation at that time. I would imagine it's more of maybe an 11 personnel set, a 12 personnel with a tight end out of the game, where they're going to try to spread you out, either find a crease to run the football or get you on the perimeter. So I'm going to be in my nickel alignment. I'm going to be in my base front. So I'm going to have Riley Mills up the middle. I'm going to have Howard Cross up the middle. I'm going to have Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Jordan Patelho as my edge players. I'm going to be in my base defense there. I'm going to have 2 linebackers on the inside in this situation. So I'm going to have J.D. Bertrand, probably either Jack Kaiser, Nolan Ziegler, Jalen Sneed, maybe somebody like that up the middle with J.D. Bertrand. And then on the perimeter, I'm going to have Thomas Harper in the game. And I'm going to be playing my call is going to be, I'm going to be in press man. I'm going to make it very hard for you to run a quick inside breaking route. If you're going to try to pick me, that's okay. You have good communication there. My field end is going to that'd be John Baptiste. Part of the reason I want him in the game is because he's very long and I want to get a longer guy there. So if you're going to throw quick game to the field, I'm going to be able to kind of have him get his long arms up. I can't stand on 4th and 3 and 3rd and short situations where teams play press or play man coverage, but they give away the inside. You're not beating me with a slant. You want to throw a far out cut, and more power to you. You want to try to throw the ball down the field, that's fine. I think we can cover you well enough if I'm looking at it from Notre Dame's defensive standpoint. So I'm going to be in my nickel defense. Thomas Harper, my starting safeties. For me in 4th and 3, it'd be Ramon Henderson and Xavier Watts. Obviously, Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart on the outside. And I'm basically going to say I'm putting Thomas Harper in a position to make a play, and I'm going to be playing pure cover 1. So I'm going to have my safety down backside to try to take away any kind of quick slant type of situation. And then play cover 1. And if they're going to beat me on 4th and 3, they're going to have to beat me throwing the ball down the field. And in that situation, I think my defensive line can get there in time to make a play. So that would be where I would go with that pressure. And I'm not a big heavy blitz guy, but I'm going to bring somebody at linebacker most likely, unless I feel really good about my defensive line, because I just don't want that quarterback thinking that I have a shot. Now the other thing I may do is I may walk up and show a blitz and then smoke and maybe drop 3 guys or into coverage, kind of get them out of a run check with my alignment and then just drop underneath quick game with my backers. That would be another potential thing that I would consider doing. Colonel Klink's monocle. I can't even remember the last time I could catch a live show. I'm glad that you did. I wonder if the run D will be better simply by adding more beef in the interior. I don't think it will be. They had beef last year and Chris Smith. Look, here's the thing: beef only matters if it's good beef, right? It's you. If you have a couple 320 pounders and they're not very good, it doesn't really matter that you have beef. What matters is that you have beef that's really good. And I think that's the thing that I look at and say, look, there's all types of different ways to be effective. If I'm in a 3rd and 2, I'm not going to have Howard Cross come off and take a double team. What I'm going to say is I'm shooting him into one of the gaps. I'm going to have him say, dude, You're going to hit A gap or B gap, depending on his alignment, and I need you to win in the backfield. I need you to get penetration, and then I'm going to be having a linebacker crash right behind you, right? So that could be just as effective as putting a bigger guy in there and saying, "Hey, I'm gonna eat up two spots." Now, if you have a Lewis Nix type of beef guy, sure, yeah, great. If you have a Jordan Davis type of guy or Jalen Carter type of guy, wonderful, go for it. That sounds great. But unless you have that kind of guy, I don't think just putting beef in there really is the answer. What the answer is having a really good football player there and then having your calls fit what that player does. And I think this is the thing, and I'm pretty sure Ryan agrees with me on this, is you have to play to your personnel. And if you're going to have Howard Cross and Riley Mills and guys like that in the game, you're not two gapping with those guys. Penetrate, penetrate, penetrate. Use their athleticism to go make plays. That's the key. If you go out and recruit, let's say in a couple years, Davion Dixon and Sean Silviano are your two starting defensive tackles, and they're both 315, 320 pounds. And they're able to make play. Yeah, okay, two gap all you want. That's fine. But that's not who Notre Dame is right now. And even then, I still feel like Notre Dame is a team that's going to be able to go out there and be physical and all that. That's fine, but they're always going to be a team that's going to be a little bit on the smaller side. I just don't know that Notre Dame is going to be able to make a living getting a bunch of 315 pounders. Have as many as you can, but be a team that's still about attacking, aggressiveness, getting after the football. I think that's going to be the most important thing for Notre Dame. Jason Smith says, which quarterback would you take to go one season, each in their best college football season? Vince Young, Tim Tebow, Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young, or Deshaun Watson? Man, that's a good question. I would say if we're going to talk about Notre Dame's offense for 2023, let's say that. Because my answer is going to be easy, or is going to be kind of cheating if I don't have more context. What kind of offense are we running? So I'm just going to tell us this is what we're doing. We're running Notre Dame's 2023 offense. With that being the case, I would not take Vince Young and I would not take Tim Tebow. They are run throw guys that are more geared towards sort of the running spread, where you can do those things. They're both phenomenal players. I don't know if they necessarily would fit as best with who Notre Dame is this year. I would rather have a guy that's a run throw guy that's just a little bit more of a natural passer. And I think Vince Young was a little bit more of a natural thrower than Tim Tebow was in college, but neither of them are really natural passers. Great runners, great players. If I was running a different offense, I would say, yeah, okay, take him. If I was running, for example, if we were going to say, hey, which of those guys would you want running the 2017 Notre Dame team? My answer completely changes. I take Vince Young or Tim Tebow. I take either one of those two guys, probably Tim Tebow. But you're in a win-win, right? You're great with both of them. This year's team's a little bit different. So when it comes down to it, I would say I'd probably not take Bryce Young, because I would like a little bit more of an element of being able to run, and Bryce was a good scrambler, but not really a runner. I would probably go with Deshaun over Trevor, looking at Notre Dame's personnel. And I'm curious. I think some people might disagree with me on this. Let's just take away Deshaun Watson's personal stuff and who he may or may not be as a human being. Let's just talk about it from a football standpoint, okay? I think Trevor Lawrence was a phenomenal player, and there's no way to go wrong with Trevor Lawrence. I think he was accurate. I think he was smart. I think he was all those type of things. But the one thing I felt about Deshaun, and I'm actually going to see if my feeling is backed up here by the data, because I always want to be data driven. So Deshaun throwing the deep ball, 37 of 90 his last year. What was he in 2015? Because I'll be honest with you, I actually sometimes thought Deshaun was a little bit better at times in 15 than he was in 19. So it's 34 of 80 in 2019. So then Trevor in 2018, throwing the deep ball, was 25 of 59. So yeah, Deshaun threw the ball more deep. Trevor did not have a great completion percentage, 42.5. Deshaun was 41.1. Deshaun had 5 drops. Trevor had, let's see what his drops number were that year. Deep ball, he had 3 drops. So numbers were very similar. I just kind of felt like I felt like Deshaun was kind of a clutch deep ball thrower, but was also a guy that could run around. I'd probably go with Trevor or Deshaun, and it would be Trevor in 2018, not 2019. I thought the 2018 version of, or I'd take Trevor in 2019, not 2018 or 2020. I thought 2019 was the best version of Trevor. I thought the COVID stuff made it really hard for Trevor to kind of get into a rhythm in 2020. I think the 2019 version of Trevor Lawrence was really good. That was the one that could run a little bit more and throw the ball down the field. I think the 2016 version of Deshaun, I'm kind of back and forth on this. I'm feeling Deshaun is my initial pick. Now I'm leaning towards Trevor. I think I'm going to settle on Trevor. And I think the reason I'm going to settle on Trevor is actually because I think Deshaun made a ton of plays, but looking at the stats, I don't know. He threw a lot. He threw the deep ball a lot more. That's kind of my where I was leaning towards. So their completion percentages were similar. In 2000 and let's see what Trevor's numbers were in 19. I was looking at his 18 numbers. Trevor went 30 of 73 in 41.1%. That's very similar to Deshaun's 4 drops. Deshaun in 2016, he threw 90, 37 of 90. I just kind of want a guy on this Notre Dame team that's going to throw the ball down the field. Trevor in 19 was more willing to do it than he was in 18 as a true freshman. So, end of the day, give me one of those two. And if you were going to give me Bryce Young, I'd take Bryce Young too. But I just feel like those other two guys were just a little bit more accomplished and they actually won titles. Bryce never won a title. So that's where I'm going. Either Trevor or Deshaun. If I had to go to, I'd probably take Trevor just because he doesn't turn the ball over as much. So, but look, guys, end of the day, you take any of these 5, you got yourself a heck of a quarterback, and you got a chance to go out there and win a championship this year. No doubt about it. Berkey03 said, out of these players, who do you see getting the most PT this season? Armel Mukam, Brennan Vernon, and Devin Houston. Of those 3, I would probably go with Armel Mukam. And I'll have more on him at the end of in the next couple weeks. But so far, I'm hearing some very good things about Armel Mukam and what he's doing so far since he showed up for summer workouts. But yeah, it's not a wrong. I mean, I just feel like with Armel, I think he's probably the guy that had the best chance to play. Devin, maybe if he would have played in the spring, I think he might have had a shot because he didn't get a chance to practice in the spring, so he didn't really get the boost of being an early enrollee because of that. Academically, he got a good jump, but football-wise, he didn't. But it's also a much deeper depth chart. I mean, look, he would have to pass up a couple guys to get number 3 at big end. One of the freshmen could easily become the number 3 big end this season, so I'm going with Armel. I'm surprised you didn't have Boubacar Traore on there. I would have considered Boubacar in that conversation as well as a guy that have a good shot to play this year. Would you take Hartman over any of the above? I'd probably take him over. Like I said, this is going to sound nuts. I understand it's going to sound nuts. For Notre Dame, I consider taking him over Tebow. I wouldn't take him over the others. I really wouldn't. I think Sam's going to be a great player. Bryce Young is a phenomenal talent. I think Vince Young would throw the ball well enough in this offense, and that I can live with that if it's him or Sam Hartman. And obviously, I wouldn't take him over the 2 Clemson kids or Bryce Young. So that's not a knock on Sam Hartman. I think Sam Hartman is going to be a very good football player this year for Notre Dame, but he's not as good as those other guys are. The only reason I wouldn't take Tim Tebow this year just because I don't think Tim Tebow fits this offense at all. Again, if we're talking the 2017 team, Tim Tebow's at the top of my list. But you've got to fit the offense you're running. And I wouldn't be able to adjust the to adjust the offense to fit what Tim Tebow does. I would have to completely change what I do, and I don't know if I then would be fitting what my other personnel does. But here's the other thing. Guys, if Tim Tebow is my starting quarterback, I'm going to be really freaking good. I mean, that's the thing is you're going to be with all those guys. There's no doubt about it. And somebody said Sam Hartman's better than Tim Tebow. No, he's not. Tim Tebow is one of the best quarterbacks ever of this generation. I know that people may not like him. Tim Tebow was a phenomenal, a better passer, yes, better passer, but he's not a better player. Yes, Jared, if you're going to say he's a better passer, yes, I agree with that. Absolutely, better passer. And that's why on this team, I would take Sam Hartman over Tim Tebow. He's not a better player. He's just a better fit for what they're doing. But 2017 team, no brainer. I'm taking Tebow or Vince. It's not even a question at that point in time. Colonel Klink's monocle also asked, what would be Notre Dame's best front 7 to stop the run? with their current roster, I'm going to go the same front four I talked about before. Javonte actually stopped the run. Ooh, boy. I'm still going to go Javonte Jean-Baptiste at big end. I'm going to go with actually Junior Tuihalamaka as my Viper. I'm going to go with Riley Mills as my 3 technique. I'm going to put Gabriel Rubio at my nose. I'm going to have J.D. Bertrand at Mike. I'm going to have Nolan Ziegler at Will. And I'm going to have Jack Kaiser at Rover. That's my front 7 if I'm trying to stop the run. That's how I'm lining up right there. Now, if it's like a 1st and 10 situation, then sure, you can give me Howard Cross at nose too. But I'm thinking more of like a 3rd and 2 kind of thing, where I'm going to get a little bit more beef on there, but I also still want to maintain some athleticism. So that would probably be my look. Yeah, Willie McBride, late to the party, but what is the proposed solution to improving the run D? I think that Aiden Kanaana should be a big part of it if he's healthy. I think he should play. I don't know that I would say Aiden's a guy that's going to go out there and play 40 snaps a game. I would love to see Aiden Kanaana on the field this year. I would. If you can get 10 to 15 snaps a game out of Aiden on top of what you're going to get from Onye and Rubio as rotation guys, I'm good with that. I like Aiden. I think he needs to be a part of what they're doing. A big part of it, I don't know if that's where I would go with it. I think the thing for me, Willie, is I want to take advantage of the talent that I have. And the talent that I would have if it was up to me is I have some very athletic interior players that aren't huge. Now, they're not small outside of Howard Cross. Riley Mills is 296 pounds now. Jason Onye is over 290. Tyson Ford's over 290. Gabriel Rubio's over 300 pounds now. So you got more beef now than you did last year. But you still have guys that are pretty athletic for their size. And so I want to see that. I want to be quick. I want to penetrate. So, proposed solutions is number 1, being more aggressive with your fronts. Linebackers have to be more decisive. I think which JD and Jack were the second half of the year. They were certainly better, especially JD. I pointed this out earlier in the show. If you take JD's Bertrand's production over the last 6 games, right? Now, this is all of them, so I'm not taking any games out. I'm just looking at all of his last 6 games. And you say, if he could have played at that level of production for an entire season, what would his numbers have looked like? Well, it'd have been pretty good. So I'm gonna do the math on the tackles here real quick. Let's see here, 14-8. So if you take that, his numbers at the end of the year in 13 games would have been 100 tackles, and his numbers in tackles for loss would have been, I believe, about 14. So 100 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 7 pass breakups, and 3 sacks. That's the point of me saying that is, well, he didn't do that over the course of the season. The point of me saying that is that's the rate of production he had in the last 6 games, was that of a guy that would have 100 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks and 7 breakups. And the other thing too is he had a lot more solo tackles second half of the year, which is a big thing for me. This is something to show me that a guy is figuring out the defense. He's getting to the ball sooner. So the first game of the year, JD had 1 solo, 2 assists. Marshall, 0. Marshall and Cal, he had a total of 0 solo tackles and 14 total tackles. Against North Carolina, he only played a half, basically, had 1 tackle. Next game against BYU, 2 solos, 3 assists. Stanford, 6 solos, 7 assists. Now, that's the first 6 games of the year. Here's JD's next 6 games, and keep in mind he didn't play against Navy. 5 solos, 2 assists. 5 solos, no assists. 9 solos against Clemson, 3 assists. 5 solos against BC, no assists. 6 solos against USC, 3 assists. Then 5 solos against South Carolina and 3 assists. That tells me that second half of the year, JD's getting to the football a lot sooner. Means he's the first guy to get. Now, solo tackle doesn't mean I'm the only guy that makes a tackle. It means I'm the guy that gets there and makes the tackle, right? And then other people may jump on, right? So to me, when you look at his production over the course of the final 6 games, it is that of a player that was much more confident in what he was doing. And it backs up the analysis that Ryan and I gave during the second half of the year, where we would break down the film and say, Maris is still struggling, but JD's starting to figure it out. And he was a much more productive player. So how do you utilize JD? Okay, don't ask him to be manti. Let him attack. Let him attack downhill. But you can't, I don't think the best way to have a 6 foot, 230-pound linebacker attack is with your defensive lineman two gapping. It's slant Howard cross this way, bring Riley on a twist, and have JD come right off one of them, or slant them this way really quick, get penetration, a vertical slant. And because you can slant kind of like a wider swipe, so you have guys slant over two gaps, because the point is to kind of create an opening for your backer. And it's more of a lateral slant. I like the vertical slant, so you're kind of shooting into a different gap and then bringing a guy on, but you're trying to get a penetration with the slanters because you're trying to get those offensive linemen to turn their shoulders. Once a lineman turns his shoulders, he's having a really tough time then getting back around to the linebacker in the gap that he just turned his shoulders away from. And so to me, when you look at the personnel that Notre Dame has, I think that type of penetration works really well. You can do that with Riley Mills. You can do that with Howard Cross. You can do that with Jason Onye. You can do that with Gabriel Rubio. You can do that with your ends. And then that allows JD to be attacking downhill and flying downhill. And that's just something I want to see a lot more from him. I want to see him get the opportunity to do that a lot more as well. Same with Jack Kaiser, same with Maris, same with Nolan Ziegler, same with Jalen Sneed or Drake Bowen or Jaden Osbury or whoever's going to be playing linebacker, Preston Zenner, whoever's going to be playing linebacker for Notre Dame, is let them attack. And the best way to do that with the D-line they have is to be a penetrating D-line. Reset the line of scrimmage in your favor with your quickness and speed. And that's where I would be. And somebody just asked quickly, who's behind Javonte Jean-Baptiste in the rotation? I don't know that Javonte is going to be the starter. He may be the number two behind Nana Osafo-Mensah. Those two will be the 1-2, barring injury, at big end this season. Will be Javonte and Nana. Maybe Nana starts because Nana's been providing great leadership this offseason. So they may start him, and then Javonte kind of comes off the bench, but then maybe plays more. I could see that, and I'd be okay with that. But those two guys are going to both play a lot of football at the field end position for Notre Dame this year. Fighting Irish Fan 91. List the tight ends from number of snaps most to least. Now list the tight ends receptions most to least. Eli Raridan, Holden Stace, Kevin Bauman, Mitchell Evans, Davis Sherwood, and I don't know who that last guy is. Cooper Flanagan. Sorry. I'm thinking James Flanagan, who spells his name like that. Cooper Flanagan. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I really just had a brain fart there because I was thinking James Flanagan. He's not there yet. Okay. Most snaps. I'm going to go Mitchell Evans 1, Holden Stace 2, Davis Sherwood 3, Eli Raridan 4 because he's going to miss half the year if he plays at all. I consider putting Eli down even further. I'm going to go Cooper. So you got me. Cooper Flanagan 5 and Kevin Bauman 6. That's where I'm going to go. Most receptions, it's going to be Mitchell Evans, Stace. I'm going to go Raridan, Flanagan, Bauman, Sherwood. Although I wouldn't mind seeing Davis Sherwood get a couple balls this year, like in some big play, come out with he's in the game, do some sort of run action off tackle, have him wheel right up the sideline, throw that sucker over top. Maybe have him on an angle route in a situation like that or a little slot. I could see him getting the ball in a couple situations. And he made a great catch of Sam Hartman hit him on an in cut in the spring game, and he got drilled and made a great catch. He held on to the ball, moved the chains. It was really good play from Davis Sherwood. T-Guns asked, Sean Silviano or Davion Dixon, who you got? Well, obviously, Sean Silviano's a year ahead of Davion, so he's got a little bit of advancement physically, but I think that Davion's the better prospect for me. He has a much higher grade. He's a 4-star kid at that stage. I don't have Sean Silviano as a 4-star right now. So I'm taking Davion Dixon. Beef Eater, Brian, would you rather run a triple option package or have Kane Madden back on the line? I'd rather have Kane Madden back and run a normal offense than run the triple option. Guys, I wasn't the Kane Madden hater that your boy Vince was. My boy Vince was, right? I wasn't. I don't think he was that good, but he wasn't so bad that I'm running the triple option. I'm tell you that right now. I'd put Vince at guard and run a normal offense before I would run the triple option. So yes. I don't think Vince would want to do that, but that's what I would do. So no triple option for me. Fighting Irish Fan 91 also asks, I want to see Audric Estime get a lot of TDs. I also want to see Sam get a lot of TDs. How do you see Audric looking in the pass game this year? Projections for receiving, receptions, yards, TDs, and things. You know, it's funny. I actually think he was pretty good in the pass game last year in limited situations. I actually think he's going to see a big jump in the pass game this year because he's not going to be getting splitting those carries with Chris Tyree or splitting those touches with Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs as much. Chris Tyree and Logan Diggs combined for 34 catches last year. Now, I think Chris Tyree's going to take some of those catches. He's going to take with him to receiver, like all the stuff he did where he lined up outside and took the screens. He's going to keep those. But Audric had 9 catches for 135 yards last year. I could see him being a 20 catch guy for 180, 190, 200 yards or so. I could really see that, maybe even more. When there's a couple times there was the Navy game. There was a play. There was one against USC. And he actually had one against USC, but there was there's a couple other games where I'm like, if you just throw the check down to Audric, there's no one near him. He's running 15, 20 yards before anybody gets close enough to tackle him. I think Sam Hartman makes some of those plays. We saw last year, the North Carolina game, he had a catch. I think it was the Cal game. Didn't catch an angle route against, it was one of the home games. Let me look and see which game that was. He caught a ball on an angle route. I think it was the Cal game. Yeah, the Cal game. He had 3 catches for 43 yards. Where, boy, you get that ball to him. Whoo, goodness gracious. It wasn't North Carolina. It was Cal. And USC had 2 catches for 31 yards, 1 for 30 against Navy. If you guys remember that little quick route over the middle, caught it, and boo, he was off to the races. So I think he can be that kind of effective back. Is he a guy that I'm going to run a bunch of corner routes with? No, I'm not. But Audric can catch the football. And I think those are more ways to get him the football. Like drop back. If they want to drop 8 in the coverage, fine. Throw a swing route to Audric and let him catch it and run somebody over. Let's see how often their cornerback wants to come up and try to tackle Audric Estime in space. I don't think it's going to be very often. So I would certainly do that. I would like to see him do that. As far as touchdowns, I mean, I'm with you on that. I mean, he had 11 last year, splitting carries. I expect him to be a double-digit touchdown guy again this year. I think what you're going to see is I think Notre Dame as a team is going to score more touchdowns, number one. So last year, Notre Dame, I mean, they weren't a very good scoring offense. They were 31.8 points per game. They had, 3 special teams touchdowns last season. They were a team that scored 53 touchdowns. That's it. They were 58 the year before. So, I think they're going to be a team that scores more. You look at some of the teams that are, I'm going to find a team that I think is going to be comparable from a scoring standpoint to Notre Dame this past year. And I'm going to show you the difference in touchdowns. So let's say Notre Dame is a 37 point per game team over a 13 game season, let's just say, right? So you're looking at UTSA, you're looking at, a better example, SMU, 63 touchdowns. Notre Dame last year as a team had 53 touchdowns. So that's what, 10 more touchdowns, to say 63, 10 more touchdowns. Plus, I don't think they're going to have, what do they have? How many defensive touchdowns did they have last year? Let's go touchdowns. So you had Brandon Joseph had a defensive touchdown on a pick 6. Prince Colley had a blocked punt. Benjamin Morrison had a pick 6. And I thought there was one more, but it looks like I was not correct on that. But you had 3 non-offensive touchdowns last year. Let's say you only get 1 of those. So now you're talking about adding 12 more touchdowns to the offense. I think some of those are going to go into the pass game, right? I mean, you're going to see the quarterback pass for more this year, but you had 25 touchdown passes last year. So if you're adding 12 more touchdowns to your roster, and let's say 10 of them are passing touchdowns, that's 35 passing touchdowns for the offense. And you look at the rushing touchdowns last year, Notre Dame still had, they threw 25 touchdowns. They had about the same amount of rushing touchdowns, I believe, last season. So their total rushing touchdowns, 25. Well, Logan had 11 of them. I expect him to have a few more of those this year. So I could see him being a 13, 14 touchdown guy this season. He was actually had 12 touchdowns last year because he had a touchdown receiving. So I could see him being a 13, 14 touchdown guy. I could. And being a 20 catch guy for Notre Dame this season. I could certainly see both of those. Beefeater said Vince would be cutting knees left and right. He'd be getting penalties, though, man. You can't do that as much as you need to. But, yeah, he would be. But, again, we're not running the triple option, so he wouldn't be cutting as much. I don't like cutting on the inside zone. unless we're inside zone. I like to cut back on the backside of outside zone, but not inside zone. Mike J. Brian, where would you rank CJ in last year's class? Who would you put him above? So, I mean, again, last year's class, I would have had him as a five-star quarterback. I mean, that doesn't change. The five-star part doesn't change depending on what class you're in. You're either a five-star or you're not. Who would I have had him over? Here's who I would have had over him. Here's who I would have ranked ahead of CJ last year at quarterback. Um, because I mean, I'm going to put him above everyone that he's not above, right? So that's just the easiest way to do it. So if you look at the rankings from last year, I would have had Dante Moore ahead of him. I would have probably ranked Nico ahead of him. Probably. Those are the only two for sure that I would have definitely ranked ahead of him last year. So if you look at, let me go to the just let me get a quick refresher of the quarterbacks in last year's class. So Dante for sure, probably Nico. I would not have had Arch Manning ahead of him. I would have not have had Malachi. Now I would have had Malachi ahead of him. So if we're comparing them at the same age, I would have had Malachi ahead of CJ as juniors. So this is where it's a little bit unfair. I did not like Malachi's senior film, and I did not like some of the things I learned about Malachi as a leader or lack thereof as a senior. So Malachi's grade actually went down for me. But as juniors, I would have had Malachi Nelson ahead of CJ. Certainly would have had him ahead of CJ. So those would probably be the only guys. There's nobody else in the class I would have had ranked ahead of him at this point. So he'd have been a top 5 quarterback for me in last year's class, just like he is in this year's class. James O'Reilly says, since the arrival of Marcus Freeman, what position group has seen the biggest jump in recruitment and which has been the biggest jump in on-field production? Hope y'all are staying cool. The biggest jump in recruiting, I mean, goodness, it's probably linebacker as far as what Coach Freeman has done. Now, I'm concerned about whether or not that's going to continue, James. I don't know if that's going to continue. I don't have the same faith in the current guys. But when you talk about that, the recruiting that they were doing at linebacker before he got here, and then the 2-year stretch he had as the DC, and then the first year as a head coach where you added Josh Burnham, Jalen Sneed, Nolan Ziegler, Junior Tuihalamaka, Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury, and Preston Zinner. That's a heck of a 2-year haul linebacker, man. That is a really good 2-year haul linebacker. Somebody said receiver. I think the issue at receiver was as much a problem with retention and coaching as it was recruiting. I mean, let's not forget that they had some, like 2018, for example, if you're going to look at the years that Coach Alexander had, his recruiting tailed off at the end. But like the Notre Dame, he was bad recruiter. But Chip Long was not a bad recruiter, and Tommy Reese had a role as well. But you look at the 2018 class; they got Kevin Austin, they got Braden Lindsey, they got Lawrence Keys, they got Micah Jones, they got Joe Wilkins. 2019, they got Cam Hart, Kendall Abdul-Rahman. I really liked Cam Hart. 2020, they got Xavier Watts, who I thought was a top 100 caliber player. They got Jordan Johnson, who was a highly ranked guy. Jay Brunel is a solid number 3 type of guy. 2021, they got Lorenzo Styles, who was a top 150 guy, top 100 guy. Deion Colsey was a top 100 guy. You got Jaden Thomas, who's a 4-star. The whole group was 4 stars. And then in 2022, you got Tobias Merriweather. The problem is he wasn't the primary driver of a lot of those recruitments as the receivers coach. That was a problem. And because he didn't have that relationship with kids, he had trouble keeping guys on the roster. And not all of them are his fault. Like, I don't blame Dell Alexander for why Jordan Johnson didn't pan out and Jordan Johnson transferred. That was on Jordan Johnson, right? Now, he didn't help or make it better, but certainly he wasn't the primary driver of that. The issue, however, was you didn't develop guys. Guys weren't getting coached up. You weren't getting the most out of your players. But I don't think receiver recruiting as a team was a problem. Dell's recruiting was a problem, which required, so Deion Colsey decommits because Dell doesn't do a good job. Then Coach Reese has to be the one to go back in there and get Deion back into the class, right? Chip Long was the primary driver for Lorenzo Styles. He was the primary driver of, Dell played a role in Kevin Austin, but Chip was the driver of getting Braden Lindsey here. He was the driver of getting Lawrence Keys here. He was the driver of getting a lot of those guys there. Tobias Merriweather, obviously Coach Alexander did a nice job there. But yeah, that was not the. I don't think recruiting was as big of an issue. Dell's recruiting was an issue, and retention and development were issues. Not so much recruiting as a roster because the OCs played a big role in that as well. Linebacker recruiting to me was a mess. It really was. So I think that's a position. And then the other one for me would be if you linebacker. The other one for me is cornerback. I think cornerback recruiting since Mike Mickens has arrived has also been really good. So my two are linebacker and cornerback since because I don't count the first year of cornerback recruiting of Ryan Barnes in that class as part of it because that was here before Coach Freeman was here. In the 2 years since Marcus Freeman's been here, they've signed Christian Gray, Micah Bell, um, Benjamin Morrison, and Jaden Mickey. Leonard Moore this year's class. That's really good. That's really good. So those are two positions where the talent has been really an upgrade. Running back talent started to upgrade before Coach McCullough and Coach Freeman got here. Tight end recruiting has been really good. O-line recruiting has been really good. So, here's the other one. Since Marcus Freeman arrived, quarterback. Since Marcus Freeman has arrived, Notre Dame has gotten a commitment from CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. After years of Ian Book, Avery Davis, Phil Dracovic, which was a good one, Brendan Clark, Drew Pine, like that was a 5-year stretch. Yeah, the quarterback recruiting has definitely improved in that time as well, no doubt. Ryan Schulte says, "What was the two-gap scheme? Was the two-gap scheme more Al Golden or Al Washington?" It's always going to be the defensive coordinator. Like it's always going to be. Curious if this was an NFL influence or not. I'm truly curious how one doesn't look at the NDD line, prefer them to be penetrating attacking group. So the reason he did it wasn't so much to do it is because he thought the D line could do it. It's just that NFL mentality, that blitz mentality that some coaches have of I want to blitz and bring my linebackers and have my linebackers make plays. So I need the defensive linemen to occupy blockers. It's not that they were like, hey, I think Riley Mills can I mean, I think Jason Adamiola can be Jalen Carter. That's not where he's coming. It's more of I want to try to occupy these two guys so I can bring this guy on a blitz. It's because you're focusing on the scheme more than you are the players. And that's not just an NFL coach problem. That's a lot of big time coach problem. And that's the problem that Coach Golden had last year. And I don't know if it's going to be the same this year. If it is, they'll still be better because you're going to have better players, in my opinion, in certain spots, and you're going to be more experienced. So they're going to play better. But, I don't think it's necessarily going to have a huge jump at this point in time. Stephen Goodson says, do you think rankings should be more comprehensive for a player? Should they have different star rank categories for tackling, mental awareness, and speed? No, I don't think they should have star rankings for those. I think they should be part of the grading process. For me, every grade that I give it comes from an actual grade that comes from like 8 different categories. And you grade a guy within each of those categories, and then you bring the grade together to say, hey, here's the overall grade for him. So good question, Stephen. They should be part of the grading process. They shouldn't have a star for each one of those, in my opinion. You can't give me the one grade, but just tell me what the criteria is that goes into each grade. And you should grade each quarterback, for example, with the same criteria. And so how do you, what's a bias towards this? That's why you try to balance the criteria out to say, guys that are runners don't get too much credit because they're runners versus the guys that are passers, but then also to make sure that the guys that are passers don't get more credit than they should for the guys who are runners. So yeah, and it takes time. I mean, I'm still tweaking the process, always tweaking the process a little bit to make it better. You look at the misses you've had, you look at the position groups or, the certain players that you miss on. Like one of the things I looked at is linebacker was a position I missed a lot on in my recruiting as not doing this, but just as a coach. Position where my evaluations weren't good, I would tend to focus on athletics talent over. Like if a guy was really athletic, I would kind of overlook the fact that maybe he wasn't the sharpest tool in the box. You know what I'm saying? And whereas one thing I learned early in my career is it's great to have athleticism, but if a guy can't read a defense or if a guy doesn't have instincts or feel for the game, he's just not going to be a great player. And that's something that I had to learn. Receiver, I had a bias towards bigger receiver. So when I would miss a receiver, a lot of times it was with the bigger guys. So I had to retweak my evaluation process and my grading process to make sure that I wasn't putting too much emphasis on the bigger guys and that maybe didn't have the athleticism. Like Micah Jones is a guy that I missed on. And so if you look back at my grading system back then, I didn't have the more detailed grading system that I have now, where if I would have graded him out at the time, he still would have been a better grade than he turned out to be, but he wouldn't have been as high because that was back when I was still more of a gut feel type of thing. Well, that shows where I had that bias towards the bigger receiver. My grading system now, he would have been much lower on the receiver board for me. Still would have been got a good grade because I liked Micah coming out of high school, but it wouldn't have been as much because I have a system now that tries to hide some of the, you know, the bias towards one category, whether it's speed or whether it's size or whatever the case may be. You try to balance it out between size and frame and strength and quickness and agility and speed and route running ability, blocking ability, production, injury history, all that stuff is part of it. So it's a little bit more of a comprehensive grade. But I'm not going to tell you all, hey, here's my grades for all 10 guys, because I don't know if it would necessarily uh, be the most constructive thing. I used to do that. I don't do that anymore, because what would happen is people would like take one part of it and then take it completely out of context. So now it's just like, give me the one grade and we're ready to rock and roll. Uh, Beezer 12 washing beard. Which coaches are you most excited to see at fall camp? It's the new guys. I mean, for me, it's the either the new coaches or the guys in new places. So like I want to see what Jared Parker does with the offensive line. I want to see how he, what kind of command does he take of the offense this year, right? And then of course I want to see the new coaches. I want to see what Coach Rudolph is doing. I want to see what Coach Gadouli's doing. Those are the guys that I'm most excited to see. And then of course, I always look forward to watching Mike Mickens coach and watching Chancey Stuckey and Deland McCullough, especially coach. Those are always fun to see those guys. And so as far as excited, those are the guys I'm most excited to see. And I wouldn't say that I'm excited to see Al Washington. I'm curious to see Al Washington, because I thought he did some good things in the spring. If he can build on that this fall, get the most out of. I did a defensive end preview today, so I'm starting my season previews today, and I did one of the defensive ends, and I said, if Al Washington's a smart coach, he's going to look at a guy like Josh Burnham, for example, and say, I got to make that guy my pet project and figure out a way to get that kid coached up and get him on the field, because that kind of ability is just really impressive. And hopefully he's able to do stuff like that. But if he's able to do stuff like that, and the production on the defensive line this year could take off, because it's a really talented group. It just needs to be developed and kind of steered in the right direction. And hopefully he'll be able to do that. Adam Shipley, what is Carr's high school competition like? It's okay. It's not great, but it's not terrible. I mean, he's playing against a lot of guys that are going to like Grand Valley State and Saginaw Valley State and some of those Division III schools. So it's good football. It's not like playing in Atlanta or Indianapolis or anything like that, but it's solid. It's solid. But honestly, I'll say this again. I don't care what a high school competition is. I've said this a million times. You're not a 4-5 against bad competition, but a 4-8 against good competition. You're either a 4-5 or you're a 4-8. That doesn't change based on your competition. You can either throw the ball 50 yards on a dime or not. That doesn't matter. All that matters is how open your receivers get. But that comes down to your ability to evaluate as an evaluator. So that, for example, there's a play that we talked about during the film where CJ completes it for a big play. And I said, look, against better competition, that's broken up because he was behind the guy. You got to be able to evaluate it that way. And I know that's not what you're asking. I'm just adding some context to the question. I really don't think that I think people focus too much on the quality of the competition. Now, if a guy's dominating good competition, that's great. But look, I've never seen a wide receiver dominate great competition more than I saw Javon McKinley do in high school. I mean, this is a kid. I'm actually going to I'm going to pull this up, because what he did in the playoffs of his in high school and who he did it against was just some of the most absurd stuff I've ever had. I've pointed this out before, but Javon McKinley, as a junior in high school, had over 50 catches for 1,000 yards and over 10 touchdowns in the playoffs that year. In the playoffs, not for the entire season, in the playoffs. So if you go back and look what he did that year, so see if we can find that ranking. So that year, Javon McKinley had 6 catches for 104 yards and a touchdown against Mater Dei. He had 5 catches for 109 yards against Orange Lutheran. He had 7 catches for 103 yards and a touchdown against Bishop Gorman. He had 3 catches for 118 yards and a touchdown against Long Beach Poly. He had 5 catches for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns against Norco in the playoffs. He had 14 catches for 240 yards and 4 touchdowns against Gardena Serra in the playoffs. He had 6 catches for 187 yards and a touchdown against Mater Dei. So he played against Mater Dei twice that year. had 6 catches and over 100 yards both times. Against Bishop Amat, he had 11 catches for 282 yards and 3 touchdowns in the playoffs. Against St. John Bosco, he had 13 catches for 151 yards and a touchdown. And then they don't have his numbers against they played De La Salle for the title, and they don't have those numbers in there, but he had like 6 catches, I believe, and over 100 yards in that game, and had an 89-yard touchdown on a kick return in that game. That you are never going to see a guy play against better competition ever than what Javon McKinley did that year. He finished with 91 catches for 1,906 yards, and that doesn't even count the numbers he had against De La Salle in the title game. So he was over 2,000 yards receiving that year, folks. And he was a good player at Notre Dame for a year, but he didn't dominate, right? Golden Tate played against some of the worst competition I've ever seen in my life. Go back and watch Golden Tate's high school highlight film. It is literally like coaching a D3 level. There was not a kid on the field that I saw that I would recruit other than Golden Tate. It was bad, really, really bad. But you could see the talent. His talent was really good. And so he was able to obviously be a great college player. So I just don't care about that. I really don't. It's a good context to have in regard to, you need to kind of have an idea of what they're playing against when you're breaking down the film. Like, hey, but it's more about his skill. Like, that play's not going to project to college very well. And I think that's part of it. But I don't really care a lot about what the competition is. We've seen stuff like I've seen with John, with perfect example. Look at the numbers that JT Daniels put up in high school. I mean, JT Daniels' numbers in high school were just some of the dumbest I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, they were unbelievable numbers in high school. And, played at Mater Dei, played against great competition, and look at him. What's he going to be, like Rice this year? Because he didn't pan out at USC, didn't pan out at Georgia, didn't pan out at West Virginia, and he just wasn't that guy, right? And so, we can focus on those type of things all we want, but at the end of the day, I mean, your talent matters, your heart matters, your brains matter. By the way, his last 2 years of high school, and keep in mind, he left after his junior high school. As a sophomore in high school, JT Daniels had 4,800 passing yards, 74.5% completion, 67 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions against phenomenal competition. As a junior, 4,100 yards, 52 touchdowns, 4 picks, rushed for 569 yards for 9 more touchdowns. Again, against great competition, completed 71.8% of his throws. Great competition. What did he do in college? Right? It just doesn't matter to me. It really doesn't. We're not Marshall. Brian, what do you see the staff having to work on with CJ once he's on campus outside of playbook? Does he need to improve his footwork, ball handling outside the defense? His ball handling at times gets a little loose. There's going to be some things that CJ does in high school that you're going to be like, bro, you can't do that in college, right? It really comes down to getting him stronger and then learning the offense. I mean, there's not a lot of technical refinement that CJ needs. He's just one of those things where he just has to get better at. He's got to get stronger. He's got to fill out his frame. He's got to protect the football a little bit more when he's really running around. He does a pretty good job of, like, when he's going to step in and when he climbs in the pocket, he does a pretty good job of tucking the ball in front and then open it back and up and throwing the football. I'm more referring to when he gets like outside the pocket. I want to see him do a little bit better job there. But then there's just going to be normal improvement that comes with maturing as a player. And he'll read defenses a little quicker. He'll get the ball out with a little bit better timing, and those type of things are all going to be part of the refinement. But it's really just going to come down to getting him stronger and getting him comfortable in Notre Dame specific playbook. Those are really the primary things that he needs to improve upon, in my opinion. And Kenny Minchie was a very similar way. Kenny doesn't need a ton of coaching from a fundamental standpoint. It's just about get him stronger and learning the offense, clean up a couple little things here and there, and then just get him ready to go. They're not guys that need a lot of, like, Brandon Clark needed a ton of coaching. Phil Jurkovec, if he was going to be a pocket quarterback, needed a lot of technical work. Guys like that needed work, but like CJ and Kenny are pretty well coached, refined players coming into college, in my opinion. Let's get a couple more here, Ryan. I want to get about 5 or 6 more, so find your 5 or 6 best questions. Adam Shipley, any traction of the Reese being a top candidate for Northwestern? It doesn't make sense for him to take a job like that. Is there any truth? Traction? Look, guys, I put it out there that he should be a candidate, and I think it's kind of fun that that's now being talked about. But at the end of the day, right now, Tom Reese isn't going to Northwestern this season, so he's not going to be thinking a lick about it right this second. He's thinking about Alabama. Could I see Tommy Rees being a candidate when the season's over? Absolutely, I could see him being a candidate. He's a Chicago guy. He's very well respected in the area. He's an offensive guy. If Alabama's good, he'll be able to come with like a reputation that people will respect from not Notre Dame fans because y'all feel the way that you feel, but from a national standpoint, he'll be a guy will grab a lot of attention if they're successful in Alabama. But they've got to get that offense going this year if he's going to be a guy that's going to be considered a top candidate. Beefeater says, if CJ Carr was a fast food restaurant, how would you rate him on a scale from Taco Bell instant dysentery to solid Wendy's, a top-notch In-N-Out, Shake Stack, Culver's? I mean, I'm putting him out. Got him as a 5 star. I love this question, by the way. I got him as a 5-star, so I got him as an In-N-Out guy. In-N-Out's my favorite fast food place. Used to shop at Culver's, but we don't eat there anymore for non-food reasons, more personal belief reasons. But definitely not a Wendy's. Shake Shack. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever had eaten at a Shake Shack. I've had Steak and Shake, it's okay. The shakes are good. Burgers are a little greasy. But I'd give him an In-N-Out. He's an In-N-Out for sure. Absolutely. Back up says, who would be the best two-way player on the roster for Notre Dame? Oh boy, I have to think about that one. It's going to be somebody that's like a receiver / DB, most likely. Nolan Ziegler was a pretty darn good two-way player in high school. He had 70+ catches for over 1,000 yards as a senior. I could see Josh Burnham being a guy that could play edge and then also play like some H-back, tight end, catch the ball. He was a really good running quarterback, had over 1,000 yards during that stretch. Somebody said the right answer was Five Guys. I don't consider Five Guys fast food. That's like a restaurant. That's not fast food to me. There's no drive-through at Five Guys. So your own answer is wrong, Beefeater. I'm sorry. You're just incorrect on that one. Micah Bell, Christian Gray, Xavier Watts. That's who I'm going with. Xavier Watts. That's my best two-way player because I think Xavier Watts could go start at receiver like now if they would have committed to him. I'm going there. Yep, I'm going Xavier Watts. That's my best two-way player. And the reason I'm not going Cam Hart, Eric Santini, Cam Hart would be a good one. Cam doesn't catch the ball real great, which is part of the issue, right? So I'm not going there. Xavier had great hands. So Xavier Watts, that's my pick for that one. Very, very good question. Very good. There's a lot of those answers. There's some linebackers. Preston Zinter, Ryan and I have talked about this. Preston Zinter is a guy that can play H-back if they needed him. Like if they recruit like 2 great linebacker classes and Preston's having trouble climbing up the depth chart and Davis Sherwood graduates, that's the first guy that I would have a conversation about moving over there. So yeah, that would be a good one. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker. One of each position on this year's team: Florida Samardzija, Quinn of Clawson. Okay, I'm trying to understand this. One of each position on this year's team: Floyd or Samardzija, Quinn or Clawson, Lewis Nix or Stephon Tuitt. Okay, I better understand what you're trying to do. Floyd or Samardzija, I'm going Floyd. Quinn or Clawson, I'm going Clawson. Lewis Nix or Stephon Tuitt. That is a good one. That's a tough one. I think Stephon Tuitt was the better player, but I'm just sitting there thinking about, man, what would an interior of the Notre Dame defensive line look like if they had Lewis Nix at nose guard? And it still makes me sad when I think about him. But you can't go wrong with any of these. I'm going to go Lewis Nix, Jimmy Clausen, and Michael Floyd. That's what I'm going with. Because could you imagine this team, Jimmy Clausen at quarterback, and Michael Floyd in the boundary with Tobias to the field, Jaden Thomas to the field, Chris Tyree to the field, those 3 guys playing. You'd have Deion Colsey as kind of your rotation guy. Lewis Nix at nose guard. This team would be really nasty. Somebody asked Clausen over Quinn. I'm in why? Because I think Brady was a phenomenal leader. Brady was a great winner. We named our first dog Brady, and it was after him. My wife really liked Brady Quinn. I had a great deal of respect for Brady Quinn. So if you all know how much I care about dogs, you would understand that naming my dog after somebody is a major compliment. For me with Brady, I love Jimmy's accuracy. I love his ability to throw the deep ball with tremendous accuracy and timing. Jimmy was a phenomenal passer. I mean, you sit him back in the pocket. I think this is going to be an offense that is going to be about RPOs and precision and getting the ball out quickly, throwing the ball down the field, all the things that Jimmy was great at. So that's exactly where I'd go. Somebody said I'd pass on the quarterback, but I mean, we're having some fun here, right? You're not going to have any of those guys, so it's accepting the question for what it is. But I just think Jimmy was a phenomenal passer, and that's something that I would be looking for in this offense, in my opinion, is that, and that's why they went out and got Sam Hartman. If you were to say I can only take Brady Quinn, fine, give me Brady Quinn. I love Brady Quinn. He's a winner. I just don't know if, like, Brady wasn't necessarily the most accurate quarterback ever. And I don't know that the receivers are sort of the veteran poised guys like Samardzija and Stovall and Raymond 2006, where he would necessarily fit the offense quite as well. But guys, I love Brady. Brady Quinn's my second favorite quarterback at Notre Dame ever, behind Tony Rice. So I love Brady Quinn. It's just to fit this offense, I would go with I would go with Jimmy Clausen. Good question. That's a fun one. Fighting Mike 87. BD, what would you think about Northwestern potentially trying to hire David Shaw? The academics are similar but different to Stanford, and he's in an area where football matters more. Look, I think that could make a lot of sense. With my thing with David Shaw would be I would just need to know that the fire's still in the belly. It's like if I were to talk to Bob Stoops. I've said this before with Notre Dame. I would definitely consider hiring Bob Stoops, but I'd have to sit down with them first. Like, let's say Marcus Freeman left after this year for some reason, I don't know, and he wants to go be the Pope or whatever. I don't know. And you say, well, who'd you hire? I said, first call I would make would be to Bob Stoops. Now, would I hire Bob Stoops if he wanted the job? Not necessarily. I need to sit down and have a heart to heart with him and say, hey, do you still have that fire in the belly to recruit and do all this kind of stuff, right? This isn't just about football. And if he's like, man, I've been out, I'm missing it. I've been wanting to get back in for a couple of years, but I wasn't going to get back in for the right job, but unless it was the right job, et cetera, then say I'd feel great about it, right? Because I think he's a great coach, and as long as the fire is still in the belly, then I'd be all about it. That would be my thing with Coach Shaw, because Coach Shaw clearly lost the fire the last couple of years. I mean, just didn't want to recruit. Just he didn't seem happy. I mean, it's just could be me. He seemed more happy doing the NFL draft stuff. So if he takes a year off and he wants to get back in it and he wants to go recruit and do all that kind of stuff, then sure. I think David Shaw's a great coach. I think his shine came off the last couple of years at Stanford, but for years he had Stanford rolling. So, and I think he's a phenomenal offensive mind. I think he'd be able to like, because see, to Northwestern, you have to have a very creative offense, but you also have to have one that's built around a lot of stuff that he did at Stanford, right? Like, multiple tight ends, run game, leverage, all that kind of stuff. You can recruit that at Northwestern, just like he did at Stanford. And you're going to get Big Ten money, which is going to help him with facility. You're getting these brand new facilities. I mean, he's going to have a lot of things going for him at Northwestern that he did not have at Stanford. And I think he could do very well there if the fire's in the belly. And so that's always going to be a thing for me with like David Shaw, with Bob Stoops, guys that have retired for whatever reason. I always want to know, like, do you really have that fire in the belly to do all the stuff that maybe coaches don't love, recruiting and shaking hands and all that kind of stuff? I would want to know that. And if the answer is the affirmative, then David Shaw would be in my top group. He would be a guy that I'm flat out interviewing for the job. There's no question about it. And I'd have to have somebody really good to take that job over him. If like I said, he's really serious about being here and being a college coach again and doing all the stuff that goes with being a college coach. We got one more, I believe, right, Ryan? Irish Gordy Not, what's your favorite type of birthday cake dessert? That's what we're ending on. We're going to end with Ryan, give me another football one, but I'm going to answer this one, but I do want to end with a football one. It's from another good football one. This is a good one. So I was, as a kid, my favorite cake growing up was German chocolate cake. And I'm trying to remember when. It was like about 10 years ago. So it would have been like when Ange and I had been married about 5 years. When we moved so like most of our marriage, I do the cooking because I love to cook. When we moved to Defiance, Ange had just gotten out of the fire department when we had moved, and for like a couple years out, and she started her own business. But when we moved to Defiance, she started baking more. And she was doing different types of things. And one year for my birthday, she made me German chocolate cupcakes. and that's like one of the best things I've ever put in my mouth. So for our anniversary, she made so our wedding cake was had cherry chip was one of the layers, and then amaretto was another layer. So for our anniversary, she made amaretto cherry cupcakes, cherry chip cupcakes with amaretto frosting, and then she would take almonds and slice them into little thin lines, and she would put she would roast them and put those around. Oh my gosh, so good! But then for my birthday that same year, because our anniversary is in April and my birthday's in May, she made the German chocolate cupcakes, and so you make those, and then she put like a little chocolate ganache on them. Oh my goodness gracious, they're so phenomenal. So those are my favorite birthday cake and dessert, those 2 things, but German chocolate cupcake takes the top one for me. There's no doubt. I'm not a huge ice cream guy. My favorite ice cream is pralines and cream from Baskin Robbins. Is Baskin Robbins even still a thing anymore? They used to have this ice cream called pralines and cream that I loved, but then and butter pecan. Sometimes if I'm in the mood, mint chip, but butter pecan's my favorite one now. All right, last question. Here we go, Ryan. How would you distribute carries to keep everyone healthy during the year? All right. Where'd that question go? Did you lose the beef eater question there, Ryan? I don't know. Is Ryan still there? All right. Guess we're not going to be able to answer that question. So we had a good question from beef eater. At least it looked like it was going to be a good one. It started off as a good one. Um, all right. I guess Ryan left, and we're not going to be able to get that question answered. So sorry, beef eater. Okay, Ryan finally found it again. Ryan is not dead. He is not. He did not leave. He is still here. All right. Brian, how would you distribute carries to keep everyone healthy during the year? Would you split the carries against the lesser teams or let the young guys get the carries? So for me, Beefeater, I am a big believer that you go into every game feeling like, hey, we need to run our offense to win. However, when it is clear early on that you are the superior team, I am immediately getting my younger backs touches immediately. So, and sometimes like, look, yes, we have to play well, but Tennessee State's not very good. Central Michigan's not very good. We should handle Navy. So you have a plan that if you jump on them, this is what we're doing. We're getting Jadarian in the game. We're getting Jabron in the game. We're getting whoever in the game. Jeremiah loves some touches. And so I would have if we're blowing them out, if we need to win the game, then Audrick's gonna have to touch the ball 20 times to win, then he's gonna touch the ball 20 times. But if we get into a game and I'll have my normal rotation, and it's very clear early that we're thumping this team, I'm gonna say, look, once Audrick gets like 12 to 15 touches, let's get him out, right? Sometimes maybe even less if we're really rolling the team. And that's how you preserve the wear and tear is in those games, Tennessee State, Central Michigan, some other team that you blow out that you're not expecting to blow out, Navy, hopefully. Those type of games, say, okay, now let's really make sure that we're mixing it up. So you have that as a plan. It's not necessarily part of your game plan, but you have that plan in place that if you jump on a team, here's what we do. So you go into the Tennessee State game and your offense is going to go run the game. And hey, we're going to try to win the game. But if we jump on them, I want to get Kenny Minchie in the game if he's my backup, or Steve Angeli, whoever my backup is. I want to get them a series pretty early, either maybe late second quarter or early third quarter with the first team offense, just a series to let them go. That's a plan. Now, you don't have that in the Ohio State game. Well, first series of the third quarter, whether we're winning or losing, we're going to put the backup quarterback to get him. No, you don't do that. It's so it's not part of your game plan. It's that sort of that other plan you have that if the game goes great, this is my plan. And it's sort of a universal plan that you have kind of going into every game. If we jump on a team, here's what we're doing. Here's who we want to play. Here's who we're getting into the game. Here's how, here's the guys I want to get some first team reps. Here's the guys that want to get in late, all that kind of stuff. It's all part of your plan. And so you have to have that, in my opinion, to be able to be prepared. And now it evolves during the season. Hey, we've gotten so-and-so into 3 games already. So he's no longer in the blowout plan in November because we want to try to be able to maybe use him in a bowl game, something like that. Or you say, hey, look, he's played 4 games and the kid just needs to keep playing. And so then red shirt's not part of it. So it'll evolve over the course of the season. Hey, this kid's passed up this other kid, so now he's going to be part of it. But the plan doesn't change. It's kind of who you implement and who's part of it is really what is what changes over the course of the year. So that's it. That's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you for being with me today. Really appreciate y'all being part of the show today and sticking with me during this. I hope the conversation was fun. Hopefully, it was worth hanging out for a couple hours. Really appreciate y'all very much tonight. IB Nation Sports Talk. We'll have a midweek mailbag. We're going to have Vince and I will be having another team preview tomorrow. So haven't decided which position we're going to do, but we're going to continue our preseason preview prediction or productions. We'll talk about a defensive position tomorrow. So we may do linebackers tomorrow. I think I did text Vince what we're going to do. So if y'all give me a second, I'll be able to tell you exactly what position group we're going to be breaking down tomorrow. We're going to be breaking down linebackers tomorrow. So that's going to be a very fun conversation. And then, of course, Friday, Ryan and I will be back for the Notre Dame mailbag. Also, tomorrow night, Sean Stiers is right now, the plan is he's going to have an amazing guest on tomorrow night. He's going to have Danielle Green, who is a former Notre Dame basketball player, also served in the Army and won a Purple Heart. I'm really excited to see that interview. So he's going to have that, I believe, tomorrow night, which will be really awesome. So we have a lot going on in our show, folks. So do that. Do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast platform, give us a 5-star review. We are having a ton of signups on the message board. So we're definitely getting closer and closer to our goal. As I said to y'all before, a couple weeks ago or a week ago, we were about 100 new subscribers away, net subscribers away from reaching the subscriber goal that I had for next year. So when I launched the message board, I had sort of goals of when we wanted to reach certain numbers. The number that I had set for next season were about 100 net people away. When I say net, some people's subscriptions lapse, they don't sign up. So net subscribers away, we were about 100, and we have already knocked a quarter of that out in just the last week alone. So really appreciate all that. But that means more of you are jumping on board, more people for conversation, more stuff. I'm going to have some intel coming up here. Ryan and I had a meeting today about kind of what our recruiting package and stuff is going to be over the next month or so. So we're hoping to get some more intel there recruiting wise. So just a ton going on. So sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can do a normal membership, monthly, annual, or if you want to support Irish Breakdown even beyond that, and you really love what we're doing and you want to be part of the community that just says, hey, I played a role in helping them grow, you can also join the Shamrock, Blue, or Gold Club. Those are our booster clubs. If you sign up for Blue or Shamrock, we had somebody sign up today for the Blue membership. We've had a lot of Shamrocks lately. We'll also send you an IB Club mug as a thank you for joining. And if you sign up for the Gold Club, which is our top membership, we'll send you the mug, but also send you an IB Club, Gold Club t-shirt. So IB, one of our Gold Club subscribers sent me an email the other day. He was in Italy rocking the IB Gold Club shirt, which is awesome. So we really appreciate that. And it's just a token of our appreciation for your support of what we're doing at Irish Breakdown. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Hour and a half. Make sure you're locked in and loaded for IB Nation Sports Talk with Sean tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's him and Vince doing mailbag tonight. So you guys should enjoy that. So thanks for being with me today. Have a great day. Talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.